Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Gabrielle Ujlaky. Friendship during youth is very important. However, finding a true friend for life can be challenging. Sometimes, people may appear friendly but have hidden selfish motives or even darker intentions. It's not always easy to recognize these signs, and failing to do so can lead to serious consequences. Gabrielle lives in a cozy little town in Nevada, USA. The local economy relies heavily on the mining industry, which provides jobs and supports families. Gabrielle's family moved here from Colorado Springs. Her father Jim had planned to find work in the gold mines. The family was excited about their new life, believing that the town was perfect for them and everything seemed to be going well. Gabrielle was immediately drawn to this vibrant atmosphere. She loved the beautiful natural surroundings, horseback riding and ATV riding, while some consider these activities more suited to boys. This added to Gabrielle's appeal as an active and adventurous young woman. Gabrielle has a close bond with her brother James, who is only a year older than her. They spend a lot of time playing games. Their family, united and loving, always supports each other through difficult times. Even when their parents decided to divorce, they handled the situation calmly to protect their children from emotional distress. After the divorce, both parents maintained a friendly relationship and resolved issues related to property division and child custody without conflict. After the divorce, her mother, Alicia, moved away but chose to live nearby so they could co-parent. Both parents took turns caring for Gabrielle and James and maintained open communication, which helped ease the emotional impact of the divorce on the children. This approach allowed Gabrielle to grow into a strong and intelligent young woman. She became very independent and faced challenges without fear. From a young age, Gabrielle helped her parents with housework. By the age of 16, Gabrielle was skilled at horseback riding, herding cattle, and helping on the farm, and was admired by her family and neighbors for her diligence and professionalism. She was cheerful and easy to get along with. After finishing school, Gabrielle plans to attend college to study psychiatry and help people struggling with mental disorders. Gabrielle has always been empathetic to the pain of others, which is what led her to pursue this career path. However, in 2020, Gabrielle faced bullying at school. Her best friend noted that many of her classmates suddenly turned against her that year for no apparent reason. This friend suspected that envy and jealousy were the main causes, as many girls were jealous of Gabrielle's beauty and intelligence and targeted her for bullying. Eventually, Gabrielle had to switch schools, but she remained optimistic. She had a small group of close friends who truly loved and supported her. Gabrielle started to spend more time on horse racing, where she met others who shared her interests. One of them was Bryce Dickey, who was a couple of years older than her. They quickly became friends, and Gabrielle often referred to him as an older brother. However, it seemed that Bryce wanted something more than friendship. He spent a lot of time with her, and she got along well with his family. Bryce was known to be a kind and polite young man who, like Gabrielle, was always willing to help those in need. Gabrielle and Bryce became close friends because of their similar personalities. They made plans to meet up, as they often did. That day, Gabrielle was at her father's house, where he was practicing with his rock band. She was eager to spend time with her father. She was chatting happily with the band members and even invited Bryce to watch. Unfortunately, Bryce missed practice. Bryce then plans to pick Gabrielle up by car to his house to watch a movie and promises to drop her off later. When her father Jim got home around 7:30 p.m., he discovered that Gabrielle was not home. He searched the house, calling her name, but received no response. Worried, Jim tried calling her, but her phone was turned off. This was unusual, as Gabrielle was usually responsible. She was never late, and it seemed unlikely that she would forget to come home on time. The worried father called Gabrielle's brother James, but he also had no idea where she was. Jim then called Bryce to ask about his daughter. Bryce told Jim that after driving around the city for a few hours, Bryce dropped Gabrielle off near the school, where she met a guy he didn't recognize. Bryce then left to avoid interrupting their conversation. Jim asked Bryce again why they didn't go to the movie as planned. Bryce explained that he and Gabrielle had simply changed plans and decided to drive along country roads. Naturally, Jim was anxious to know who Gabrielle had met, but Bryce couldn't provide any details. He described the man as a tall, blond young man with the appearance of a cowboy. Jim was surprised by Bryce's words. He didn't understand who this stranger was or why Bryce would leave Gabrielle with a stranger instead of taking her home as planned. Bryce had always made sure to take care of Gabrielle, so this behavior seemed unusual. Bryce was very worried about what had happened. He felt guilty for not taking Gabrielle home, explaining that she had asked him to leave. Bryce now realized that the situation could be serious and that something might have happened to her. He remembered that the stranger was driving an old RD F-150 pickup truck. This only added to the family's worries, as none of her friends owned such a vehicle. Gabrielle's family tried calling her hundreds of times, but each call went straight to voicemail. Concerned, her parents decided to contact the police. However, as usual, the police assumed that Gabrielle had probably just run away or gone out with friends and would return soon. However, her parents knew that this was not normal for Gabrielle. She had very few friends and none of them knew where she was. Gabrielle had no family problems, addictions, or mental health concerns, and there had been no recent conflicts. To her family, her sudden disappearance was a clear indication that something serious had happened. The sheriff realized the seriousness of the situation. He gathered all the information available from Gabrielle's friends and acquaintances. The police then contacted Bryce to request a meeting near the school where Gabrielle had gone missing, to provide details about what happened after he dropped her off. Bryce said that he had spent the day with Gabrielle and that they had been driving around the Spring Creek area in his car. However, during their outing, his father called unexpectedly and asked him to come home immediately to help with some errands. Understanding the situation, Gabrielle agreed to reschedule their trip for the next day, but she asked to be dropped off near the school. She also mentioned that she wanted to meet her new friend, Jetty. Bryce reported that after Gabrielle exited his car, she walked directly towards a green pickup truck where a white man in a cowboy hat was sitting. He observed her but then drove off, unsure if she entered a stranger's vehicle. The Bryce had a poor recollection of the details and did not note the pickup truck's license plate. During the conversation, the police found no reason to suspect Bryce. He seemed innocent, so they decided to release him and continue investigating other clues. The police wanted to draw public attention to the case using the media, believing that someone might have seen the man in the cowboy hat and driving the green pickup truck. Initially, the police focused on identifying the license plate number. Additionally, the sheriff contacted the phone service provider to determine the last known location of Gabrielle's cell phone. They discovered that her phone had been active near the school where Bryce had dropped her off. As a result, the police rushed to that location in hopes of finding new evidence, but they found nothing suspicious there. Gabrielle's family and friends continued to search the streets, hoping to find any clues to her whereabouts in the city and surrounding areas. They distributed and posted more than 500 flyers, but local residents remained unresponsive and there were no new leads for the investigation. It felt as if Gabrielle had disappeared without a trace. Meanwhile, Gabrielle's mother Alicia created a social media group to share updates and information about the search, but the effort yielded no results. Then, out of the blue, she received a text message from an unknown number. The sender claimed to have kidnapped Gabrielle and demanded a $25 ransom, threatening to harm her if Alicia did not pay. After some time, the kidnappers sent another text message saying that Gabrielle was sick and would die without the medicine. The kidnapper insisted that he would only provide the medicine if he received the money he demanded. Initially, the parents agreed to the kidnappers' demands, but they decided to contact the police first. Alicia called the police to report the situation. They quickly asked her to come to the station so they could trace the phone number. It seemed that the investigation had turned up an important lead. While police were trying to track down the phone number used by the kidnapper, one of the search team leaders contacted the police. He informed them that volunteers were searching about 20 kilometers from the city when they discovered a puddle of what appeared to be dried blood on the side of the road. The search team got out of their vehicles and began searching the area, where they eventually discovered a blue tarp in the bushes. Underneath, they found the body of a girl lying face down, her clothes matching Gabrielle's description. One of the police officers entered the office and announced that the interview with Alicia would have to be postponed because they had to go to the scene where the body was discovered. Alicia began to cry, and upon arriving at the scene she identified Gabrielle. Forensic experts determined that Gabrielle had been raped, as her pants and underwear were pulled down to her ankles. She had been strangled and her throat had been slit. Which was the cause of death? Police found Gabrielle's headphones tangled in a nearby tree branch. They also found a used condom and its packaging near her body. This provided a clue to the investigation. Police wanted to learn more about Jetty, Gabrielle's new acquaintance, but no one could provide specific details about him. Finding this individual became a top priority. Gabrielle's family received significant support from social networks, with Bryce being particularly notable. He maintained close contact with Gabrielle's mother, father, and brother, offering help and expressing his sorrow. He described Gabrielle as a bright person and a close friend he would never forget. Meanwhile, the police began their investigation by obtaining warrants to search the Gabrielle's computer and mobile phone. They also needed to analyze the evidence they had collected, including DNA found on a condom, which was crucial for solving the case. It was suspected that Gabrielle might have been targeted by an internet predator with a history of sexual violence. The police quickly created and reviewed a list of registered sex offenders in the area who might have been connected to the incident. To identify the criminal, all the information needed to be compared. However, this process took a long time, causing the investigation to drag on. Meanwhile, the police quickly checked the information from the kidnapper. They were able to trace the phone number that called the Alicia to demand a ransom. Unfortunately, this number was not registered in Nevada. It was a hidden number bought online, making it impossible to track. The police first wanted to identify Jetty, who was considered the prime suspect in the case. After obtaining information from Gabrielle's phone, the police quickly located him. However, they were disappointed to discover that Jetty was in Alaska at the time of Gabrielle's death. Although they had met shortly before the incident and had planned to meet again, he was not the one who raped and murdered her. He had an alibi. He had not left Alaska during that time. The police decided to investigate all other people with similar initials, driving similar cars, and living in the city, surrounding areas, and near where the body was found. They were only able to identify two young men driving a green pickup truck, but both had alibis, as they were far away at the time of the murder. This stalled the investigation. The police then contacted Gabrielle's family again, hoping to get new information. Alicia said that in the weeks before her death, Gabrielle had been dating a guy who was pursuing a cowboy lifestyle, living on a ranch and competing in rodeos. They quickly broke up because Gabrielle wasn't ready for intimacy. After the breakup, they remained friends, but during some nasty arguments, he made extreme comments about wanting her dead. After verifying his alibi, it seems the investigation has stalled once again. However, the police took one last approach to identifying the suspect. They decided to review all the city's surveillance camera footage, specifically looking for a green pickup truck driven by a cowboy. Fortunately, there were several high-quality cameras along the route Gabrielle took before her death and captured clear images. Police had to analyze multiple videos that had been recorded. Despite their efforts, they were unable to find the green pickup truck that Bryce had mentioned. However, police did find something interesting. The blue Chevy pickup that Bryce himself drove really was on the recording. He did not stop or let anyone out, which suggests that he lied about the green pickup truck. The police then decided to trace the route the blue pickup took. Bryce had previously claimed he had been driving around the area with his girlfriend for several hours, but this was proven false by the video evidence. The police decided to request data from Bryce's cell phone to compare his geographic location with that of the assault victim. They quickly obtained a warrant to access this data and did not notify him to avoid alerting a new suspect. It was clear that he had been with Gabrielle all day because their movements matched until her cell phone turned off. Additionally, he was present at the location where Gabrielle's body was discovered before returning home. This indicated that Bryce was present at the crime scene and may have committed or witnessed the crime. To verify the assumption, an examination was conducted. The Bryce was immediately asked to undergo tests and provide DNA samples. He agreed. He was later released, but the police did not reveal their suspicions. Instead, they acted as if everything was normal and collected samples from everyone in the area. Skin particles were found under Gabrielle's fingernails, and these samples matched Bryce's DNA. It was clear that he had sex with Gabrielle, but everything happened involuntarily. Bryce was called in for questioning again. Bryce agreed to be questioned without hesitation, remaining calm and confident. The police asked him if he had ever had a relationship with Gabrielle, especially sexual. He denied these allegations, claiming that he considered her like a younger sister. Bryce's statements raised suspicion because if he was telling the truth, his DNA would not have been present at the crime scene. However, police discovered a condom containing his semen at the scene of the murder. Feeling that the police were onto something, Bryce changed his story, claiming that Gabrielle had flirted with him and that they had consensual oral sex while using a condom. Bryce later stuck to his story about a man in a green pickup truck, repeatedly claiming that he could not provide a clear description of the cowboy or the truck's license plate. However, multiple traces of Bryce's DNA were found under Gabrielle's fingernails, in her private parts, and even on her neck, near the fatal stab wound. Additionally, based on Bryce's movements and the surveillance camera footage, it was confirmed that he did not stop anywhere else. This indicated that he was lying. Under pressure from the police, Bryce eventually confessed that what happened to Gabrielle was an accident. He mentioned that she wanted to have rough sex with a knife, and in a moment of passion, the blade accidentally stabbed her. This explanation seems very unlikely, especially given his history of dishonesty. Bryce Dickey, 18, was arrested on March 19, 2020. Following his arrest, police searched his home and vehicle. At Bryce's home, police discovered several bloody items in his closet, including a knife that was determined to be the murder weapon. In the trunk of his car, they found a bloody sweatshirt with Gabrielle's blood on it, along with multiple fingerprints and DNA samples linking Bryce to the crime. When Gabrielle's family received the news, they were completely stunned. Her family had always considered Bryce a good young man, and he had treated them like family, considering him Gabrielle's best friend. The family had trusted Bryce as if he were their own, not knowing that he would betray them in such a terrible way. While the townspeople saw him as the true cowboy and a good person who would help others in times of need, he was actually hiding his true nature. Gabrielle's family trusted him. He made sure she got home safely and gave her regular rides, which seemed thoughtful. However, His intentions were not noble. He was actually trying to get close to his victim. In May 2022, the prosecution presented several credible testimonies, including testimony from Bryce's ex-girlfriend. She described him as aggressive and cruel, often getting into arguments. She recounted that he had choked her at least 4 times during their conflicts, with the last incident being so severe that she felt she was on the verge of death. She ended her relationship with Bryce, who had been stalking and threatening her for a long time. It was only when her parents threatened to call the police that he stopped. The jury then deliberated for about an hour and unanimously found Bryce Dickey guilty of first-degree murder and rape. The judge sentenced Bryce Dickey to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 20 years. He received an additional 20 years for using a deadly weapon, another 20 years for kidnapping, and 10 more years for rape. In total, he will serve 70 years before he can seek release. Bryce did not explain his motive for the crime. However, a friend of Gabrielle's revealed that just days before the murder, Bryce confessed his love to her, but she suggested they remain friends. Police believe that Bryce could not handle the rejection and felt resentful. When he learned that Gabrielle was seeing a new boyfriend named Jetty, he became angry and sought revenge. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Ryan Poston. Ryan Poston was born on December 30, 1982, in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, to parents Lisa Carter and Jay Poston. He had a close and loving relationship with his 3 sisters, Allison, Catherine, and Elizabeth. Ryan spent a significant portion of his teenage years traveling and studying abroad, attending schools in both Switzerland and the Philippines. Ryan was known for his adventurous nature, exceptional physical appearance, and charismatic personality, made him a standout among his peers. After high school, he attended Indiana University, where he majored in political science, history, and geography. Ryan graduated with honors in 2005. Following his family's tradition, Ryan decided to pursue a career in law. He enrolled in the Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University. Ryan had a profound respect for the legal profession, inspired by his grandfather and uncle, who were both attorneys. He had ambitious goals, one of which is the dream of owning a law firm. For the time being, Ryan worked in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he dedicated himself to offering affordable legal services to individuals who could not afford higher-priced attorneys. Although still young, Ryan had already built a considerable reputation. He attracted many clients seeking his advice and guidance. He worked diligently to ensure that everyone, regardless of their financial situation, had access to fair and competent legal representation. In 2011, Ryan has been through a painful breakup. He often visited his cousin Carissa in Lexington, Kentucky, seeking comfort and support. On one of these visits, his life underwent a dramatic change after an encounter with Shayna Michelle Hubers. Originally from Lexington, Kentucky, Shayna was a Southern and is the epitome of a true Southern girl, known for her extroverted and sociable personality. Her warmth and charm drew people to her. After graduating from high school in 2009 with a full scholarship, she studied psychology at the University of Kentucky. She then pursued her master's degree in psychology at Eastern Kentucky University. Despite their age gap, Ryan, 29, and Shayna, 21, couldn't deny their strong feelings for each other. Whenever Ryan visited his cousin Carissa in Lexington, he ended up spending more time with Shayna, and their connection deepened. As their relationship grew, Shayna began to spend most of her weekends in Highland Heights, Kentucky, where Ryan lived. She'd pack her bags, head to his home, and take care of him, cooking and cleaning for him. As time passed, their feelings grew deeper and deeper. Ryan introduced Shayna to his parents. She couldn't hide her excitement from her friends, raving about Ryan, and shares her dream of becoming Ryan's wife. However, the promising future of Ryan and Shayna came to a tragic end on October 12, 2012. On that day, Shayna called the authorities and reported that she had just killed her boyfriend, Ryan. According to Shayna, the incident began when Ryan attempted to physically abuse her. He allegedly dragged her out of the house when she tried to collect her belongings, and he confronted her with a gun. The situation became very tense and turned into a violent brawl, during which Shayna gained control of the firearm. Feeling intimidated by Ryan's, she panicked and pulled the trigger, shooting him. Believing Ryan was fatally wounded and wanting to end his suffering, she shot him several more times. Shayna believed Ryan's death was inevitable, so she wanted to end his suffering. After the shooting, Shayna placed the gun on a bookshelf and called 911 to report the incident. When officers arrived, they requested her to exit the apartment with her hands raised. Despite initial hesitation, but she complied, following the officers' instructions to lie face down on the ground. Throughout that time, Shayna appeared visibly upset. After handcuffing Shayna and placing her in the patrol vehicle, the officers entered the apartment. Inside, they found Ryan Poston dead on the dining room floor, covered in blood. Investigators then arrived and surveyed Ryan's condo. The condo appeared somewhat messy, but not unusually so for a 29-year-old man. Further investigation revealed that Ryan had a permit to carry a concealed weapon and owned firearms. The gun used by Shayna to shoot Ryan was identified as his own Sig Sauer semi-automatic pistol. Based on evidence from the apartment, investigators concluded Ryan was sitting at the table when Shayna started shooting. Blood on the table confirmed this. However, several items on the dining table were untouched, contradicting Shayna's account of a struggle. Typically, a fight would have knocked these items out of place. Investigators thoroughly examined Ryan's apartment for clues. Simultaneously, officers went door to door in the neighborhood to gather more information from Ryan's neighbors. A neighbor named Nikki provided valuable information to the detective. She knows Shayna well and feels Shayna is more responsible for the relationship than Ryan. Nikki reported that the couple often had loud arguments that disturbed the neighborhood. Months earlier, Shayna had visited Nikki, crying and expressing her fear of Ryan. Shayna claimed that a violent altercation with Ryan had left her injured, and he threw her down the hallway. Nikki believed Shayna's story and urged her to report the incident to the police. However, Shayna decided not to do that. When Shayna was at the police station, detectives interviewed her about the shooting of boyfriend Ryan. Before they started the questioning, the officers told Shayna her rights, which informed her that she had the right to a lawyer. Shayna asked for a lawyer, so the questioning was put on hold. While she waited in the interrogation room, she filled out some paperwork, under the supervision of a detective. Shayna chose to speak with the detective despite asking for an attorney. When asked the name of the victim, Shayna showed no emotion, simply stating the man she killed, clearly referring to her long-term boyfriend, Ryan. During the interrogation, Shayna explained that she acted in self-defense. She claimed Ryan had physically attacked her, grabbing her throat and throwing her around their apartment. During a break in the interrogation, the detective stepped out of the room and another officer took over. Shayna then shared new information with the officer about her confrontation with Ryan. She stated that before the shooting, Ryan said mean and unpleasant things to her, calling her unhinged and taunting her while holding a gun. Shayna attributed Ryan's violent behavior that night to being under the influence of substances. She maintained her account of the incident leading up to the shooting, claiming Ryan was sitting at the dining table handling ammunition for his pistol. She caught him staring at her from across the table and believed this was a sign that he intended to kick her out of his condo. Shayna admitted to seizing the opportunity to grab the gun and shoot Ryan. In the midst of chaos, Shayna fired one shot at Ryan, hitting him. Shayna initially thought she needed to end his suffering, as he was twitching after the first shot, and proceeded to fire several more shots, ultimately resulting in Ryan's death. Shayna revealed in her confession that Ryan was self-conscious about his appearance, especially his nose, and had previously expressed a desire to get a nose job. With this knowledge, Shayna intentionally shot Ryan in the face, claiming she was granting his wish. Throughout the interrogation, Shayna revealed that she was worried her relationship would be affected if people found out her boyfriend was dead. Specifically, she feared that no one would want to marry her if they knew she had killed her boyfriend, even if it was in self-defense. After hearing her out, the detective arrested Shayna and charged her with Ryan's murder. Shayna appeared to be surprised by her arrest, insisting that she had only shot Ryan to protect herself, and apparently expecting a different outcome. In 2015, Shayna's trial started, and the courtroom was filled with anticipation. The prosecutor began by comparing Shayna to Jodi Arias, another woman who had been accused of murdering her boyfriend, Travis Alexander. The similarities between the two cases were striking. This comparison increased the tension in the courtroom as everyone waited to see what would happen. The prosecutor argued that Shayna was fixated on her boyfriend, Ryan, and that he was all she could think about. According to the prosecution, Shayna's conversations were dominated by talk of Ryan. During the trial, the prosecutor presented a narrative of Ryan's intentions based on his friends' accounts. According to them, Ryan planned to end his relationship with Shayna and intentionally avoid her phone calls and texts. Despite these things, Shayna continued to show up at his condo in Highland Heights uninvited. The prosecution presented evidence that Ryan had plans to meet Audrey Bolt, the 2012 Miss Ohio, for a date on the night of the murder. This new information supported the prosecution's theory that Shayna was motivated by jealousy and anger towards Ryan's new relationship. Audrey testified that she had arranged to meet Ryan for drinks at a bar that night and waited for him, but he never arrived. It was only later that she discovered he had been shot and killed. During Shayna's trial, the prosecution showed the jury evidence that Ryan had often expressed his wish to end their relationship. Shortly before his death, Ryan called his father, Jay, for advice on how to handle the situation. Jay told Ryan to be kind to Shayna to avoid an ugly breakup. Despite Ryan wanting to break up with Shayna peacefully, but she continued to manipulate him. On the day of Ryan's death, evidence showed that he spent a lot of time texting with Shayna. In these texts, Ryan clearly told her that he didn't want to see her that weekend because he had other plans. Nevertheless, Shayna showed up at his condo uninvited, which was a common occurrence. The prosecution argued that during the argument, Ryan told Shayna it was over and she could no longer control him. This enraged Shayna, who then shot Ryan in a fit of rage. In trial, the prosecution played a video of Shayna's interrogation to show the jury that she was a cold-blooded killer. The video showed Shayna dancing and singing, seemingly unaffected by the departure of her boyfriend, Ryan. After killing a loved one in self-defense, most people would be extremely upset, crying and overwhelmed by what they had done. By showing the video, the prosecution argued that Shayna was a very emotionless person and did not feel remorse for what she did, implying that she didn't act like someone who had killed in self-defense. However, this explanation is not objective and depends on the jury's perspective. The interrogation video was a key piece of evidence in the prosecution's case against Shayna. However, it was not the only evidence presented during the trial. Shayna's defense team stuck to a consistent story throughout the trial. They claimed that Ryan was the one who behaved erratically and violently on the night of the incident, which ultimately led to Shayna shooting him. To support this claim, the defense team described Ryan's state of mind. They alleged that the combination of medications he was taking, including anti-anxiety medication and amphetamines, is the cause. To strengthen their argument, Shayna's attorneys presented autopsy results to the jury, prove that Ryan was using these drugs at the time of his death. This evidence suggested that Ryan's actions may have been influenced by the medications he is taking. The defense also called an expert toxicologist to testify that combining anti-anxiety medication and amphetamines could lead to violent and paranoid behavior. The goal of this testimony was to create a plausible explanation for Shayna's actions and then prove that she killed Ryan in self-defense. During Shayna's trial in April 2015, the prosecution was concerned that she would be acquitted because she was an intelligent, young, and beautiful woman. They worried that her self-defense claims might sway the jury. However, on April 23, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, convicting Shayna Michelle Hubers of murdering her boyfriend, Ryan Poston. At the sentencing hearing in August 2015, Shayna continued to blame Ryan for his death, which outraged his friends and family. Despite the evidence presented during the trial, Shayna maintained her innocence and refused to take responsibility for her actions. In Kentucky, a defendant who is a victim of domestic violence may be eligible for parole after serving 20% of their sentence. However, the judge did not grant Shayna this reduced parole, citing that she had committed a premeditated murder. Shayna was sentenced to 40 years in prison and will be eligible for parole in 17 years, in 2032, when she is 41 years old. Shayna appealed her sentence and was granted a new trial in August 2016. The appeal was granted because one of the jurors had a felony conviction, which is against Kentucky law, as felons are not allowed to serve on juries. In August 2018, after a 4-month delay, Shayna's second trial began. During opening arguments, Shayna's defense attorney stated that she had made every effort to please Ryan for the entire time they were together, a year and a half. But in the end, their love story encountered problems. According to the defense team, on the first night Shayna and Ryan met, he committed physical and sexual violence against her. This incident had a profound and lasting effect on Shayna, causing her to take several weeks to respond to Ryan's messages afterward. The defense claimed that Shayna's history of trauma began in high school when she was sexually assaulted. This led to her struggling with alcohol addiction and sexual promiscuity for many years. Her defense team argued that this traumatic experience significantly influenced her behavior on the night of the murder. The defense strategy aimed to create a sympathetic of Shayna by sharing her troubled past. They sought to prove that Shayna was not fully in control of her actions on the night of the murder. The defense hoped to show that Shayna's behavior was the result of a mix of factors. These factors included her history of abuse and her toxic relationship with Ryan. The goal was to show that Shayna was a victim of domestic violence at the hands of Ryan, rather than a cold-blooded killer. The defense argued that Shayna's actions were not driven by a desire for revenge or financial gain. Instead, they were the result of years of abuse she suffered at the hands of Ryan. Shayna's defense attorney argued that Ryan's constant criticism about her weight and chest size, as well as his pressure on her to get breast enlargement, significantly affected her self-esteem. The defense claimed that this criticism, along with the strain in their sexual relationship, contributed to Shayna's feelings of inadequacy. The defense presented evidence that Shayna had sought medical help to improve their romantic life, getting an injection to address their sexual difficulties. However, Ryan's rejection and lack of interest made the problems in their relationship worse, leaving Shayna feeling frustrated and isolated. Additionally, the defense alleged that Ryan would often end things with Shayna and then talk to other women, further straining the problems in their relationship. During their opening statement, the prosecution told the jury that they wouldn't portray Ryan as a perfect boyfriend. However, they made it clear that he wasn't abusive. They claimed that Shayna shot and killed Ryan not in self-defense. The prosecution alleged that Shayna shot Ryan because he had ended their relationship on the night of the incident. Ryan had decided it was time to break up with Shayna because she would not leave him alone. According to the prosecution, Shayna's repeated returns to Ryan after he ended things demonstrated her inability to move on from the relationship. During the trial, the prosecution showed text messages from Shayna to her friends. These messages stated that the intimate activities between Shayna and Ryan had strengthened their relationship. However, when Shayna took the stand in her own defense during her second trial, she disagreed. She claimed that these activities had actually pushed them further apart. In another set of text messages, Shayna had asked to have sex, but Ryan was taking antidepressants. The medication side effects had reduced his sex drive. However, when Shayna testified, she alleged that Ryan had forced her into having sex. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Shayna Michelle Hubers of murdering Ryan Poston for the second time. Despite conflicting testimonies and evidence, they upheld their initial verdict. During the sentencing hearing, Shayna's mother emotionally shared her daughter's singing talent and how it earned her multiple college scholarships. Choked with emotion, she asked the jury to consider the possibility of parole for Shayna. However, she acknowledged this didn't lessen the grief and suffering that Ryan's family was experiencing. Shayna Michelle Hubers was sentenced to life in prison without parole. She must serve at least 17 years before being considered for parole in 2032. She is serving her sentence at the Kentucky Correctional Institute for Women in Pewee Valley, Kentucky. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Teresa Halbach. Teresa was born on March 22, 1980, to parents Richard and Karen Halbach. She was the youngest of 5 siblings, and the family she lived on a dairy farm. When Teresa was 8 years old, tragedy struck as her father passed away, leaving Karen to care for the family alone. Karen later married her Richard's brother, Thomas, and together they raised their blended family. Teresa is an adventurous and nature-loving individual who dreamed of becoming a National Geographic photojournalist. She excelled academically, graduating summa cum laude from the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay with a degree in photography. After college, Teresa continued her work with Pierce Photography, a company where she had interned during her studies. She also launched her own business, Photography by Teresa, operating from the Pierce studio. Teresa traveled extensively for her work and to supplement her income. She took on freelance photography jobs for Auto Trader magazine, photographing vehicles for sale. Tragically, this job ultimately resulted in her premature death. All evidence pointed to a single suspect, Stephen Avery. He had contacted Teresa to schedule a photo shoot of his sister's minivan. According to records, Teresa was last seen at 2:30 p.m. that afternoon. This was later confirmed by Stephen's nephew, Bobby, who told the police that he saw Teresa's car enter the salvage yard. Stephen was originally charged with using a gun on November 11, 2005. Subsequent charges included the murder of Teresa Halbach, her kidnapping, and the mutilation of her body. However, while being investigated for these crimes, the police found blood in the SUV Teresa's that matched Stephen's. In his room, they discovered a set of car keys belonging to Teresa. Throughout the investigation, he insisted that the police were attempting to frame him. Stephen was born on July 9, 1962, in Wisconsin, where he grew up with his parents Dolores and Alan, and siblings Charles, Earl, and Barbara. However, he had a troubled past, having dropped out of high school with a reported IQ of 70. In 1981, he was jailed for 10 months after breaking into a bar. In the following year, he was found guilty of animal cruelty for brutally killing his pet cat. The cat was doused with gasoline and set on fire, resulting in a 9-month prison sentence. Stephen had a record of behaving violently in the past, including an incident where he threatened his cousin, Sharon Morris. He chased her off the street and pointed a gun at her, claiming that she was spreading false rumors about him. Although Stephen received a 6-year sentence for this crime, but then he was given bail. However, an incident led to his wrongful imprisonment for nearly 2 decades. Henny Bjornstam was attacked on a beach in Two Rivers on July 29, 1985. She described her attacker to the police, and the description closely matched Stephen. As a result, he was arrested and charged with the attack on Penny. Despite his claims of innocence, his appeals in 1987 and 1996 were denied by higher courts. Stephen's case was later taken on by the Wisconsin Innocence Project in 2001. In 2002, DNA evidence was re-examined, and he was finally exonerated of the crimes, proving his innocence. Following his exoneration, he filed a civil lawsuit against Thomas Kokarek, the former sheriff, and Dennis Vogel, the former district attorney, seeking $36 million in damages for the wrongful conviction. However, Stephen's freedom does not last long because his life is about to undergo a major change. When Teresa, a friend of Stephen's, went missing, a search was conducted at a local salvage yard. This search was initiated based on information given by Bobby, Stephen's nephew. Stephen reported that Teresa came to his location to take photos and then left. However, evidence found at the scene contradicts Stephen's testimony. These included bone fragments, a set of SUV car keys, blood in a vehicle, and a bullet from the garage with Teresa's DNA on it. As a result, Stephen was jailed for Teresa's murder. During this time, he received a sum of $400,000 in a settlement in February 2006. The investigation also involved questioning Stephen's 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey. It is worth noting that Brendan was not accompanied by his parents or lawyer during the interrogation process. Initially, Brendan confessed to the crime, stating that he and Brendan had assaulted and killed Teresa before burning her body. However, Brendan later withdrew his statement, claiming that detectives had coerced him into making a false confession. In 2006, Brendan was charged as an accessory to the murder, a charge that stemmed from his initial statement. Despite the lack of physical evidence connecting him to the crime scene, but he faced the same charges as Stephen. In 2007, Stephen was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Later that year, Brendan was also found guilty of a life sentence with the possibility of parole in 2048. A conviction was made, but it was met with controversy. Many people, including Stephen's family and his ex-fiancée Sandy Greenman, still firmly believe that Stephen and Brendan are innocent. Stephen's family continues to support him and hope that the real killer will be found. Sandy has been a vocal advocate for Stephen. She described Stephen as a model inmate and argues that people wrongly tarnish his reputation. Sandy spoke out in Brendan's defense, denying allegations that he had a history of violence. In contrast, some people firmly believe that Stephen is guilty and should be in prison. One of these individuals is Jody Stokowski, another ex-fiancée of Stephen's. Jody initially supported Stephen's claim of innocence, but she later admitted that had made it up. In an interview, Jody revealed that Stephen had threatened to harm her and her family. Therefore, she believes that he is capable of murder. Jody said that Stephen wanted revenge on women, believing that he had been treated unfairly and that his life had been affected because of it. She strongly believes that Stephen is untrustworthy and described him as a monster. Stephen's defense team questioned the reliability of the blood evidence found in Teresa's car. They argued that the evidence may not have come from the crime scene, but from another source, taken from the vial containing Stephen's blood from a prior conviction. They claimed that the vial containing Stephen's blood had been tampered with and a hole could be seen in the cork. However, the prosecution countered this by conducting blood tests to check for preservatives that are often added to stored blood samples. Since no preservatives were detected, this could indicate that the blood was not old but newly drawn. Tive, which could suggest that the blood was fresh. Stephen's defense team disputed this finding, they calling in an expert witness, who claimed that the test results were unclear, and negative result could mean that there really is no preservative or that the testing technology is not advanced enough to detect preservatives. Both Stephen and Brendan have repeatedly appealed their convictions, but have been denied and they remain incarcerated. Brendan is currently be justified professors Laura Nyroder and Brendan Drizzen from Northwestern University. They have also faced many hurdles, but they remain committed to seeking justice for Brendan. In Stephen's case, the appointment of Kathleen Zellner, a renowned trial lawyer, has injected new hope. Kathleen has a track record of overturning 19 wrongful convictions and is known for her thorough analysis of cases and her ability to uncover missing evidence. She quickly got to work on Stephen's case, and she firmly believes in his innocence. Stephen's previous lawyers, Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, have stepped back from the case. In August 2016, Kathleen requested that new scientific tests be conducted on evidence from the case, and she was willing to cover the costs. Her goal was to prove that Stephen was framed for the crime. She focused on 3 burn pits found at the scene, which showed signs of human remains being burned. Notably, a human pelvic bone fragment was discovered, which had been mistakenly included with Teresa's remains. This discovery suggests that Teresa's remains may have been intentionally placed in Stephen's burn pit. Unfortunately, his defense was denied the chance to examine these bones because the prosecution failed to disclose them. Kathleen claimed that this was a Brady violation, meaning that crucial evidence that could have helped exonerate Stephen was not provided in time. Despite this setback, Kathleen continued to investigate the case from a new angle, which could lead to the identification of a new suspect. Kathleen decided to investigate the Bobby family's computer as an alternative to testing the bone fragments. The computer analysis revealed several disturbing findings, including violent and pornographic images of women being tortured and videos showing women as victims. These materials were accessed at times when Bobby was supposedly at home. Furthermore, Barbara Taddick, Bobby and Brendan's mother, her husband Scott, and Stephen's sister seemed to be conceal evidence to avoid implicating Bobby. The forensic team successfully recovered 2,449 pages of data from the computer, including all of Bobby's searches, videos, and photos, and transferred it to a CD-ROM as evidence for the retrial. Bobby is the older brother of Brendan and the nephew of Stephen. During his uncle Stephen's trial, Bobby served as the prosecution's key eyewitness. According to Bobby, the last time he saw Teresa, she was heading towards Stephen's house. Later that afternoon, after returning from hunting, Bobby claimed that he was unable to find Teresa or her car. Brad Dassey, the half-brother of Bobby, has made several claims that have added. He believes Stephen is innocent. Additionally, Brad has stated that Barbara and Scott erased the computer's history, including all pornographic content. A key piece of evidence could potentially clear Stephen and Brendan's names, while further implicating Bobby. An eyewitness, Thomas Sawinski, has come forward claiming to have seen Bobby with an older man pushing Teresa's SUV back into the salvage yard. Thomas stated that he was driving to deliver newspapers when he saw the duo. As he passed them, Bobby attempted to stop him by stepping into the road. Thomas swerved to avoid Bobby and continued on his route. Thomas described Bobby as appearing unhappy to see him there. After learning about the SUV's discovery, Thomas contacted police to share what he had seen. However, the police rejected this, who told him they already knew who is the culprit. New testimony has cast doubt on the credibility of the prosecution's key witness, Bobby. Kathleen believes that if Thomas's claims are true, then Bobby's entire statement is false. She argued that the rejection of key evidence supporting Stephen's case deprived him of the opportunity to prove his innocence for years. The appeals court is considering the new evidence and make a decision in November 2022. Kathleen continues to represent those she believes have been wrongfully convicted. However, throughout the process, Brendan has maintained his innocence. The question remains as to whether Stephen is truly guilty. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ronald Platt. July 28, 1996, began as a typical summer day in South England. Captain John Kopek and his son prepared for a fishing trip on their trawler, the Melkerry. Despite an unsuccessful day, they decided to try their luck in a spot known as the Roughs. They lowered the net into the water and waited. The two men felt a tug on the net, indicating that it was a large catch. However, when they pulled the net up, they were shocked to find that it was not a fish, but instead a badly decomposed body of a man. Captain Kopek immediately contacted the Brixham Coast Guard to report the discovery. The body was in a state of severe decomposition, indicating that it had been in the ocean for some time. Fish had nibbled at parts of the body, but despite the decomposition, the man's clothing was intact: a long-sleeved shirt, corduroy pants, and brown shoes. And there was no identification on the body. The only identifying features found on the dead man were a smudged tattoo on his right hand and a Rolex watch on his wrist. The body was taken to the medical examiner's office in Devon for further examination. It was estimated that the man was between 40 and 50 years old. A distinctive tattoo of a cluster of stars was found on his body. His only severe injury was a head wound, which was not fatal. This, combined with other bruising, suggested that he had been dragged along the seabed before being pulled into a boat. However, his lungs were filled with water, indicating that he had ultimately drowned. Police suspected that the man might have fallen overboard during a ferry crossing. The primary method for identifying him was through dental records, as they would be on file if he was a British citizen. However, this process would take some time. It was by chance that a mortuary technician noticed the man's watch, a Rolex Oyster self-winding model that was fully waterproof. The watch required regular motion to stay active and, as an original model, its ownership could potentially be traced. Police examined the watch found on the unidentified man and discovered a crucial clue. The calendar feature showed the date July 22nd, indicating that the man had likely drowned 2 days earlier, on July 20th, 1996. Further examination revealed a serial number hidden between the wristband and the watch face. Police sent this number to Rolex to verify its authenticity and determine who owned the watch. The mystery surrounding the man, now known as Rolex Man, gained further clues a few weeks later, after a records search identified the watch's owner as Ronald Joseph Platt. Ronald Joseph Platt was a 51-year-old TV repairman born in Calgary, Canada. His family later moved to Britain, where he grew up. Ronald remained unmarried and had served in the British Army as part of his national service. Those who knew him well described Ronald as a quiet and introverted man with a deep love for his native Canada. Ronald bought a Rolex watch in Germany in 1967, which became one of his most prized possessions. Ronald was so attached to the watch that, according to his former partners, he even wore it in the shower. Detective Constable Clenahan from the Devon and Cornwall Police was assigned to the case from the start. The police investigation revealed that Ronald's last known address was in Essex, which was hundreds of miles away from where his body was found. Clenahan contacted the Essex Police Department for assistance. Inspector Peter Redmond offered to visit the address to help with the investigation. When he visited the house, Peter found it vacant. Peter then contacted the owner and was told that the owner had moved out some time ago. However, Peter was provided with a letter of introduction that could assist in the investigation. The letter provided the address and contact details of a man named David Davis. Detective Peter called the number and got in touch with Davis. Before delivering the news, Peter asked Davis about his relationship with Ronald. Peter then informed Davis that a body had been found in Devon that was likely to be his friend. Davis agreed to meet with the police in Essex to discuss the matter further. When they met, Peter found Davis to be friendly and confident, but surprisingly calm, and asked very few questions about Ronald's death. Davis and Ronald had been friends for several years. Davis hadn't seen Ronald in over 3 months, and the last time they met, Davis had given him a loan to start an electrical business in France. Since then, Davis had assumed Ronald was living in France. During their conversation, Peter discovered that the symbol tattooed on Ronald's hand was a maple leaf, the national symbol of Canada. After providing all the necessary information, Davis left the station, assuring Detective Peter that he would send a photo of Ronald. The Essex police were then able to conclude their investigation, forming the theory that Ronald had fallen overboard and drowned in the channel. This theory aligned with Davis's account of the events, suggesting it was simply an unfortunate accident. With the Essex case over, Clenaghan had a problem on his end. He tried to contact Davis several times but was unsuccessful. Clenaghan then asked his colleague, Detective Peter of Essex, to help him contact Davis. Peter agreed and visited Davis at his home in Wooden Walter, a rural area of Essex with only 4 houses. They continued to describe Ronald to Peter, and he suddenly realized that the man they were describing was none other than the recently deceased Ronald Platt. This sudden revelation aroused Peter's suspicions, and he quickly contacted Clenaghan in Devon to share this surprising discovery. Police from both counties began to suspect that there was more to the case than initially appeared. Peter turned his attention to gathering information about the man impersonating his deceased friend. Peter visited an elderly couple, Frank and Aubrey, who shared with him the story of Ronald Platt, a young man with a wife and 2 young children. The couple mentioned that Ronald and his family frequently vacationed in Devon, where they owned a yacht, although they could not remember the name of the yacht. In Devon, Clenaghan reviewed the evidence and began reinterrogating old witnesses. His first was John Coppock, who revealed that when Ronald's body was found, a 10-pound anchor had also been pulled up in the net. John Coppock had given the anchor to a friend, who then passed it on to his mother to sell. Fortunately, the anchor had not yet been sold, allowing the police to retrieve it as evidence. Clenaghan's next step was to interview people who knew Ronald. He contacted Ronald's brother, Brian. Brian mentioned Elaine Boyes, Ronald's old friend of 13 years. Police then spoke with Elaine Boyes and discovered the connection between Ronald Platt and Davis. Elaine Boyes had met Davis in 1991 while working as a receptionist at a fine arts auction house in Harrogate, England. She recalled Davis as being tall, engaging, and charming. During their conversation, Davis mentioned his plans to move to Yorkshire, and the topic turned to job opportunities. Davis offered Elaine Boyes a job at his company, but she declined, explaining that she and Ronald were planning to move to Canada soon. Davis offered to help Elaine Boyes and Ronald save money to move to Canada. Elaine Boyes soon became Davis's executive assistant, and she soon introduced Ronald to Davis. The 2 men quickly became close friends. Elaine Boyes and Ronald were fascinated by Davis's lavish stories and impressed by his lavish lifestyle. Davis then offered them a business opportunity, proposing that they become directors of his company, the Cavendish Corporation. Although Elaine Boyes was initially hesitant, Davis explained that he wanted to keep a low profile due to his ex-wife, a wealthy doctor in New York, who allegedly still demanded alimony payments from him. By this point, Elaine Boyes and Ronald had developed a trust in Davis and believed that he was genuinely trying to protect her from his ex-wife. Davis sent both Elaine Boyes and Platt on business trips to Europe to negotiate deals on his behalf, gradually drawing them into his scheme. They transferred money to various offshore bank accounts without asking Davis what he intended to do with it, trusting him greatly because of his religious nature. On Christmas Day 1992, Davis invited Elaine Boyes and Ronald to visit Davis and his daughter, Noelle. After a sumptuous meal, they exchanged gifts. Elaine Boyes presented Davis with a card titled "The Greatest Gift Ever." In return, Davis gave the couple 2 plane tickets to Canada, provided they used them before February 1993. While Elaine Boyes was overwhelmed by the short notice, Ronald was overjoyed that his lifelong dream of returning to Canada had finally come true thanks to Davis. In preparation for their upcoming trip, Davis quickly made arrangements. To ensure he could effectively manage their affairs while they were away, he asked Elaine Boyes and Ronald to stamp their signatures and leave their driver's licenses with him in case they needed to prove their identity. Elaine Boyes and Ronald agreed, as they trusted Davis and were grateful for the new beginning he provided. Consequently, in February 1993, they left for Canada. However, the harsh winter conditions, lack of job opportunities, and resulting financial strain quickly put pressure on their relationship. Elaine Boyes and Ronald's relationship began to unravel due to increasing tension, ultimately causing them to drift apart. 5 months later, Elaine Boyes traveled to England to serve as a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding, with no intention of returning to Canada. Davis, who had become a family friend, was also invited to the wedding. During the event, he spoke with Elaine Boyes and asked about Ronald. Upon learning that Elaine Boyes had ended her relationship with Ronald and would not be returning to Canada, Davis was upset. He attempted to persuade Elaine Boyes to give Ronald another chance, but she refused. Davis packed up his life, said goodbye to Elaine Boyes, and left her with his mobile number. However, their friendship eventually dissolved, and the phone calls ceased. Ronald and Elaine Boyes had lost contact. Ever since Elaine Boyes moved away from Canada, she had not heard from Ronald, her former lover, or Davis, who had been her best friend. So when Davis suddenly contacted Elaine Boyes in late 1996, their conversation was somewhat awkward. They barely exchanged any important information, and surprisingly, Davis did not even mention Ronald's name. The conversation was brief, and they did not keep in touch after that. He failed to tell her that Ronald was dead. After the interview, Elaine Boyes suspected Davis was involved in Ronald's death. Police needed more concrete evidence. They started questioning witnesses. Following the wedding in Harrogate, Davis quickly moved to Devon with his family. There, he introduced himself as Ronald Platt. He also introduced his pregnant daughter as his wife, sometimes calling her Elaine Boyes. It was well known that Davis owned a yacht. Witnesses reported seeing Ronald and Davis together a month before Ronald's body was discovered. They claimed to have registered on Steam Packet as brothers, David and Ronald Platt. By this point, police knew Davis had lied about Ronald and his knowledge of Ronald's death. They needed one last piece of evidence to confirm their suspicions. Police analyzed mobile records and discovered that the calls made by Davis originated from the same area where the medical examiner believed Ronald had drowned. This led Essex police to plan a sting operation to arrest Davis on suspicion of Ronald's murder. The police were informed by Elaine Boyes that Davis had arranged to meet her for coffee at Chelmsford train station. The police arrived at the train station. However, Davis had escaped. Not giving up, Detective Peter decided to drive to the Davis family home. Pete called for backup. He speculated that Davis might be armed. As the police prepared to act, a taxi stopped at the entrance of the house, and Davis quickly escaped. The police promptly gave chase, and Davis was eventually caught and forced to surrender at gunpoint after Davis was arrested. Police took his fingerprints and submitted them to an international database. Albert Johnson Walker, a man on Interpol's wanted list and Canada's most wanted fugitive, was identified as the owner of the discovered prints. Albert Johnson's life story began in Canada. Born on August 9, 1945, in Hamilton, Ontario, Albert Johnson had big ambitions despite dropping out of high school. He had a charismatic presence. Albert Johnson met his ex-wife, Barbara MacDonald. They married in 1968. The couple started a family early and had 7 children, 3 girls and 4 boys. Albert Johnson was born in Paris, Ontario, where he and his wife Barbara started a freelance accounting business. The business grew rapidly, and within a decade, it had expanded to 6 locations with more than 30 employees. However, Albert Johnson deceived his friends and clients by secretly transferring their investments to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Over time, Albert Johnson's dishonesty wasn't the only problem he faced. His marriage began to fall apart due to his many affairs. Furthermore, those he had stolen money from began to become suspicious. With his empire on the brink of collapse, Albert Johnson decided to go on the run in 1990. Under the pretext of taking his 15-year-old daughter Sheena on a skiing trip to Europe, Albert Johnson escaped. Barbara discovered the incident and, concerned for her daughter's safety, reported her missing. The police tracked Albert Johnson to London, but lost track of him. Albert Johnson assumed a new identity, stolen from a client. He now went by the name Davis Wallace, and his daughter Sheena changed her name to Noel. Although he evaded the police, the name Davis linked him back to his real identity. Davis Wallace needed a new identity, and his opportunity came when he met Ronald Platt. Ronald had a strong interest in Canada. Davis used this information to his advantage and created a new identity for himself. However, his plans began to fall apart in 1995 when Ronald contacted him, saying that Ronald was frustrated with life in Canada and was moving back to Essex to be closer to Davis. This development posed a problem for Davis, as having 2 Ronald Platts with the same birth date in the same area would have raised suspicion. To solve this problem, Davis came up with a plan. He bought a yacht, the Lady Jane, and took his family and Ronald to Totnes and Devon to celebrate the launch. During this trip, Davis and Ronald purchased a new 10-pound anchor. Davis invited Ronald to Devon for the weekend to go fishing and enjoy the coast. Davis took Ronald to his boat, the Lady Jane, far enough from shore to avoid detection. Once alone, Davis hit Ronald over the head with the anchor, knocking him unconscious. Davis then searched Ronald's pockets for identification and retrieved it. Davis tied the anchor to Ronald's waist to weigh him down and threw him into the water, intending to make it look like an accident. However, Davis made the mistake of leaving Ronald's Rolex watch on his wrist, which was later used to foil the carefully planned crime and bring Davis to justice. Davis's trial began in 1998. During the trial, some key evidence was presented to the court. The anchor found in the net along with Ronald Platt's body. Forensic experts analyzed the wound on Ronald's head and determined that it matched the shape of the anchor. Further investigation found traces of zinc on Ronald's belt, which matched the zinc found on the anchor. It was discovered that the anchor had been attached to Ronald's belt to drown him in the sea. A search of the yacht, Lady Jane, also uncovered significant evidence. Hairs matching Ronald's were found on a cushion, and his fingerprint was discovered on the bag that had been used to carry the anchor back to the yacht. Additionally, blood was found near the rails, providing further evidence to the case. Davis's hoarding habits cost him, as documents were seized and used to prove his sham business ventures and his trail of deception. Elaine Boy's testimony provided evidence that Davis would lose a lot if Ronald Platt returned to England. And his daughter Sheena testified that Davis had been out on a yacht and looked disheveled and agitated when he returned later that day of the murder. Sheena also spoke candidly about life with Davis and how she was constantly harassed by her father and feared for her own safety. Supreme Court Justice Neil Butterfield said Davis was an extremely intelligent and ruthless individual who posed a threat to others. He stated that Davis's crimes were carefully planned and executed with precision. As a result, Davis was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. In 2005, he was allowed to move to Canada to serve his sentence. 2 years later, at the age of 61, Davis was given an additional 4-year sentence to be served concurrently. In 2015, Davis applied for parole but withdrew it at the last minute. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Mackenzie Lueck. Mackenzie Lueck was born on March 8, 1996, to Diana and Gregory Leck. Her father worked in healthcare logistics and administration, and her mother was a homemaker. Mackenzie grew up in El Segundo, a city in Los Angeles County, California, with an older brother and two younger brothers. Mackenzie attended El Segundo High School, where she was a member of the swim team and played water polo. Mackenzie was a hardworking student with a strong interest in art, music, and animals. Mackenzie attended the University of Utah, where she majored in kinesiology and nursing and was a member of the Alpha Kappa Omega sorority. While in college, Mackenzie shared her feminist views and switched her political orientation from major party to conservative third party. Mackenzie worked at a biotesting company in Salt Lake City. Mackenzie wanted to pursue a career in health sciences, discussed with her counselors plans to attend nursing or medical school, and expected to graduate in May 2020. The Mackenzie family lived a normal life until everything changed on June 17, 2019. On that day, Mackenzie returned to Salt Lake City, Utah, after her grandmother's funeral. She arrived at Salt Lake City International Airport around 2 a.m. and texted her mother, "Just landed and love you, Mom." When her mother Diana answered a few moments later, Diana discovered that Mackenzie's phone was turned off. Her father Gregory also tried to call Mackenzie but was routed to her voicemail, causing Mackenzie's family to become very concerned for her safety. On June 20th, Mackenzie's parents realized that her friends had not seen or heard from her either. Mackenzie's friends reported her missing to the Salt Lake City Police Department. Over the next 2 weeks, while Mackenzie's parents Diana, Gregory, and their 3 sons tried everything they could to find Mackenzie in California, Mackenzie's Alpha Kappa Omega sorority sisters organized search efforts in Utah. They even created a Facebook page called Find Mackenzie Lueck to attract national media attention to the case. As police searched for clues about Mackenzie, they discovered video footage of Mackenzie at the airport. She was then picked up by a Lyft driver and taken to Hatch Park in North Salt Lake, about 13 miles away. Police checked Mackenzie's cell phone records, confirming that Mackenzie had been at the park. Police also discovered that Mackenzie had exchanged several text messages with a person named AAE, whom she had allegedly met on a dating website and planned to meet in person. Mackenzie's last text message to AAE was sent at 2:58 a.m. Cell phone records showed that both Mackenzie and AAE were at Hatch Park at the same time. Notably, at 2:59 a.m., Mackenzie's phone stopped transmitting data or location information, indicating that the phone had been turned off. Police tracked AAE's cell phone signal, which led them from the park to his home at 547 North 1000 West in a Fair Park neighborhood. Police found that AAE's cell phone was at his home at 3:07 a.m., just 7 to 8 minutes after he picked up Mackenzie from the park. Since AAE was the prime suspect in Mackenzie's disappearance, police decided to execute a search warrant at his home. During the search, police discovered a newly dug area in the backyard. Inside this area, they found burned human bones, muscle tissue, and charred personal items. In a nearby alley, police also discovered charred fabric and other items belonging to the victim. After the DNA from the bones matched the DNA profile of the items found, police identified the victim as Mackenzie. A neighbor reported a foul odor coming from a campfire in AAE's backyard, which was also fueled by gasoline, on June 17th and again on June 18th. This is where police found a shallow grave containing bones and tissue. Police impounded AAE's car after detecting a strong smell of gasoline and finding a red gas can in the trunk. They discovered that a can of gasoline had been purchased at a local store at 9 a.m. the day Mackenzie went missing. After arresting AAE, police checked his cell phone records, which showed AAE's phone was in Logan Canyon, a location where he buried Mackenzie's body on June 25. Between 2:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. police searched the area and found freshly disturbed soil in a wooded area near the main road, where they discovered a charred human body. On July 3, the medical examiner confirmed that the body was that of Mackenzie. Her hands had been bound behind her back with zip ties and rope. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the left side of the skull, and her death was classified as a homicide. On October 7, 2020, AAE pleaded guilty to first-degree aggravated murder and third-degree indignity to a human body in connection with Mackenzie's death. AAE was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 5 years for indecent assault on Mackenzie. AAE was also charged with kidnapping another woman in March 2018, whom AAE met on a dating website. In addition, AAE was charged with 19 counts of sexual exploitation of a minor. These charges arose in August 2019 when police discovered child pornography on AAE's computer while investigating Mackenzie's death on July 2. The images reportedly showed children aged between 4 and 8. On October 1, 2020, AAE pleaded not guilty to these charges and the pornography charges were eventually dismissed. The tragic death of Mackenzie Lueck has had a profound impact on her family, friends, and the entire nation. Her cheerful personality, zest for life, and desire to make a positive impact were suddenly ended by a senseless act of violence. Mackenzie's story serves as an important reminder to always be cautious and safe, especially when using online dating services. Rest in peace, Mackenzie Lueck. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Els van Doren. Els van Doren was a 38-year-old Belgian woman married to Jan de Wilde, a jeweler. Together, they had 2 children, Vincent and Carol. Although he worked in his family's jewelry store, Els van Doren's real passion had been skydiving. She initially took up the sport with her husband in 1994, but she quickly overcame his interest as her passion for skydiving grew. Els van Doren was an experienced skydiver with 2,300 jumps. Every weekend and holiday, she spent time skydiving. In 1998, she began formation jumping, and in 2001, she became a member of an all-female skydiving team called the Divas. The team competed at the World Skydiving Championships in 2003. However, Els van Doren had to leave the team in 2004 due to a herniated disc. After recovering, Els van Doren decided to skydive more for fun than for competition. She joined the Swartberg Parachute Club, where she met a fellow skydiver and close friend, Els Babs Klotmans, who was 26 years old and a school teacher. To avoid confusion within the club, Els van Doren suggested the nickname Babs for her young friend. Both women were acquainted with Marcel Summers, a member of the Swartberg Parachute Club. As Els van Doren, Babs, and Marcel became acquainted, Els van Doren found herself developing a strong relationship with Marcel, which eventually became a romantic relationship. Even though she was married, Els van Doren was able to keep her relationship with Marcel a secret because her family was used to her spending weekends at the skydiving club. She often visited Marcel's apartment on weekends without arousing her husband's suspicion. What Els van Doren didn't know was that she not only shared a name with Babs, they also shared a man, Marcel. Unbeknownst to both Els van Doren and Babs, Marcel had been secretly hooking up with both of them, devising a plan to manage his time with each of them. Friday was for Babs, while Saturday was for Els van Doren. This arrangement worked for Marcel for a while, but it didn't last long. On Friday evening, November 10, 2006, something unexpected happened. As planned, Babs went to Marcel's residence for a weekly meeting, but what she didn't know was that Els van Doren had also decided to surprise Marcel that night. Babs and Marcel had just finished dinner and were returning to their apartment when they met Els Van Doren, who was waiting outside the door. That night, Babs did not sleep in Marcel's bed as expected. Instead, she slept in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Marcel and her friend, Els Van Doren, were in the bedroom. While in the living room, Babs noticed Els Van Doren's parachute and skydiving equipment nearby. Feeling hurt and betrayed by her friend's actions, Babs acted in a way that would ultimately have devastating consequences. On November 18, 2006, 12 members of the skydiving club, including Els Van Doren, Babs, and Marcel, boarded a flight over Flanders. Their plan was to jump in a four-person formation from 13,000 feet with Tom, another skydiver. During the jump, they would hold hands before leaving and opening their parachutes. Els Van Doren and Tom jumped out of the plane as scheduled, but Babs seemed to have jumped a little late. As they free fell, Babs struggled to keep up with the group. At an altitude of 9,000 feet, Marcel, Els Van Doren, and Tom decided to break formation to safely open their parachutes. That's when they realized something serious was going on. Els Van Doren's parachute wouldn't open when she pulled the rope. Remaining calm, Els Van Doren recalled her emergency training and remembered a previous experience where she had successfully deployed her reserve parachute after the main parachute failed. Els Van Doren was plummeting towards the ground at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour, with only 20 seconds to perform an emergency maneuver to ensure a safe landing. Despite her best efforts, pulling the reserve parachute cord had no effect and the parachute could not open. In a state of panic, Els Van Doren continued to pull both the main parachute rope and the backup parachute rope. But nothing happened. Marcel, at an altitude of 800 meters, witnessed Els Van Doren's desperate struggle from afar. He was 300 meters above Els Van Doren, who was only 500 meters above the ground, and he knew something was wrong because her parachute had not opened. However, he was powerless to intervene and could only watch in horror. In a last-ditch effort, Els Van Doren tried to untangle her parachute in hopes of activating it, but it was too late. Her life ended. Meanwhile, in Upavbeek town, a woman was drying laundry in her garden when she heard a loud noise. She looked up and saw a person falling from the sky with a parachute, heading straight for her garden. This sight was not unusual as her house was located near a skydiving club and its landing strip. She suddenly noticed a piece of white cloth stuck to her bush. When she got closer, she saw a person lying in the bushes. She immediately called her husband, who was working in the garden, and they quickly called emergency services. Meanwhile, Marcel had landed safely and was desperately searching for Els Van Doren. He spotted an ambulance and followed it to the scene where Els Van Doren had landed. As he rushed towards her, he was restrained by the emergency team so they could work. Despite their efforts to resuscitate her, Els Van Doren died. Marcel emphasized that Els Van Doren's parachute was inoperable, pointing out that it was unusual for both the main and reserve parachutes to fail to open. He then contacted Els Van Doren's husband, Jan, to tell him the news. Jan rushed to his wife's side, while Tom and Babs returned to the skydiving club to break the tragic news to the other members. The news was heartbreaking. Babs was overcome with grief, falling to her knees and crying in pain. Els Van Doren's husband, Jan, went to the skydiving club to pick up her belongings. When he arrived, he met Babs, who offered to help him. However, Jan found it strange that Babs seemed to stand still with a strange grin on her face. She walked towards the dressing room with Jan following, but then suddenly locked the door, leaving Jan outside. After a long wait, Babs finally walked out carrying Els Van Doren's belongings. At the scene of the accident, police found Els Van Doren's parachute and helmet. The helmet had a camera that recorded her final jump. An autopsy was performed to see if Els Van Doren's death was caused by any internal cause. Results showed no signs of alcohol or drugs, leading investigators to conclude that her death was a murder or suicide. This conclusion was based on the severe fractures and internal bleeding caused by the fall. Els Van Doren's family suspected that she might have been murdered by someone in her own skydiving club, someone who knew how parachutes worked. As a result, club members were asked not to attend her funeral, but some of Els Van Doren's close friends chose to ignore this request. The family's suffering became even greater when police revealed that Els Van Doren had a secret affair with Marcel Summers that lasted more than 5 years. Jan was especially hurt when he learned that some of his club members knew about the affair, people he considered friends, but they all had kept quiet. What was even more painful was that Els Van Doren had told her clubmates that she had divorced her husband, which was not true. Els Van Doren had passed away just 1 day before her child Carol's 15th birthday. At the funeral, Carol gave a heartfelt speech, recalling how her family had prevented her mother from skydiving. They had longed for her to be with them, but Carol also admitted that her mother had been a unique person who wouldn't have been happy if she had given up what she loved. After the funeral, police began investigating the incident with Els Van Doren's reserve parachute. They sent a skydiving expert to check the parachute and look for abnormalities. Experts quickly discovered a critical problem: the pilot chute, a small auxiliary parachute that helped deploy the main or reserve parachute, was missing. Obviously, someone had deliberately removed it. Experts also discovered that the main parachute activation cord and one of the cords connecting to the emergency parachute had been cut. During the final review of body cam footage of Els Van Doren's fatal skydiving accident, an unidentified piece of red fabric was seen in front of her. Investigators were unable to identify the object as part of Els Van Doren's equipment. They therefore asked OPLAB residents to thoroughly search their garden and surrounding area for the piece of red cloth and warned them to handle it carefully if found, as it could be potential evidence containing the DNA of the person responsible for sabotaging Els Van Doren's parachute. Unfortunately, no one was able to find the piece of fabric. A week after Els Van Doren's death, a surprising discovery was made when Babs found the pilot chute. According to Babs, she had discovered the parachute hanging from a tree while driving between OPLAB and Genk on the way back from Marcel's apartment. Instead of contacting the police directly, she told Marcel about the discovery. Marcel then called the police, who arrived at the location and found Babs visibly shaken and emotional. The police were skeptical of Babs' story, as they found it unusual that she had stumbled upon the pilot chute. Babs insisted it had been just a coincidence, explaining that she had taken a different route home and had been delayed by a slow-moving tractor. She said this delay had caused her to look up and see the parachute hanging about 20 meters above her, which she interpreted as a sign from Els Van Doren. The police were suspicious because they knew that only investigators knew that the pilot had been missing. At that time, 3 people were the main suspects in Els Van Doren's suspected murder case: her husband Jan, her lover Marcel, and her friend Babs. Police searched Marcel's residence and eventually identified him as a suspect. They later also cleared Jan as a suspect. They then searched Babs' home and confiscated items such as her phone, laptop, and diary. In her diary, she had written down her feelings following the advice of her psychiatrist. Later, Els Klotmans, also known as Babs, was questioned by the police about her relationship with Marcel and what had happened to Els Van Doren. During the interrogation, Babs insisted she had had nothing to do with Els Van Doren's parachute. She blamed Marcel, claiming that he had often taken care of Els Van Doren's equipment when she stayed at his place on the weekends, or blamed Jan, claiming that Els Van Doren had often left her belongings at his house during the week. After the initial interrogation, Babs was released and went home. However, she did not appear for a second interview scheduled for December 20, 2006. It was later discovered that that morning she had tried to take her own life by drinking a combination of sleeping pills and antidepressants. Her mother had found her unresponsive and immediately took her to the hospital for emergency treatment. Before attempting suicide, Babs had written letters to loved ones expressing her struggle to cope with the loss of her close friend and the extreme stress of being a suspect in a murder case. After recovering, Babs had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital for 15 days for close observation. This had not been her first attempt at self-harm, as she had previously been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression. Marcel ended their relationship, believing her actions had been more a call for attention than an actual attempt to commit suicide. He thought she had taken the pill just before her mother had been due to return home, suggesting her main goal had been to divert attention from suspicion of involvement in the murder of Els van Doren. Marcel thought the police had been trying to track down Babs and arrest her based on her lies. While still under psychiatric care, Babs had been arrested on January 11, 2007, as a suspect in the murder of Els van Doren. When Babs appeared in court on January 19, 2007, authorities decided that she would be detained while the investigation was ongoing. Authorities asked Babs to take a polygraph test, but she refused and it was never taken. A thorough examination of Els van Doren's parachute equipment had showed that someone had deliberately cut the parachute cord with scissors. The investigation revealed that the person responsible might have been right-handed. Babs spent 3 months in prison by March 2007, having to endure many interrogations. During questioning, she denied any wrongdoing but admitted sending anonymous letters to Els van Doren. The letter affirmed that Els van Doren's actions towards her family were wrong. Jan found the letter, but he interpreted it as a criticism of Els van Doren's frequent absences due to parachuting. However, Babs' intention had been to warn Els van Doren to end her relationship with Marcel. Babs also confessed to calling Marcel anonymously, especially when he had been with Els van Doren. She had intended to threaten them. Investigators analyzed Babs' automatic activation device, AAD, and discovered that Babs had jumped with the rest of the team and deployed her parachute beforehand. This supposedly allowed Babs to witness events unfold from above and monitor where Els van Doren's parachute would land. Babs could have landed and retrieved the parachute later. Babs' trial in the murder of Els van Doren began on September 24, 2010. Babs had been quickly arrested. The prosecution felt confident that they had enough evidence to prove Babs had committed murder. They believed Babs had been motivated by jealousy because she had discovered her lover, Marcel Summers, had been having an affair with her best friend, Els van Doren. Babs had previously told investigators that she knew Marcel preferred Els van Doren to her. The prosecution argued that Babs had wanted to eliminate Els van Doren as a rival. However, Babs' defense argued that the prosecution's case had been based on circumstantial evidence and unproven allegations. During the trial, Babs claimed that she had not seen a future with Marcel and only had an intimate relationship with him because of her low self-esteem. She even suggested that Els van Doren's daughter, Carol, might have wanted to harm her mother for being away for the weekend. However, despite her efforts to manipulate the jury and shift blame, the judge's verdict prevailed. On October 20, 2010, Babs had been convicted of murdering her friend Els van Doren and received a 30-year prison sentence. During the trial, Babs, steadfastly maintaining her innocence, had been closely monitored to prevent her from harming herself again. She later filed an appeal claiming that the police had interrogated her without a lawyer. In May 2011, her appeal was dismissed. In June 2022, after serving 12.5 years in prison, Babs was conditionally released after a third appeal and is now free. It is a pity that Els van Doren had suffered a tragic fate and that her family had suffered immense pain when the truth had been revealed. Our sincerest condolences go out to the family and loved ones of Els van Doren, who will be deeply missed. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shanynthia Gardner. Shanynthia Gardner was born in the late 1980s in Memphis, Tennessee. Not much is known about her early life. She is the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass from Madison, Alabama. Shanynthia was a slim, beautiful brunette with curly hair as a child. Shanynthia was a multi-talented person. Her creative spirit was evident in her songwriting abilities, which helped her become a local celebrity. Shanynthia also has a keen eye for fashion and photography, attends church regularly, and spends time with her family. Shanynthia seems well-rounded and full of promise for a bright future. Shanynthia met Daryl Clayton when she was 14 years old. They became close friends. As they grew up and graduated from high school, their friendship turned into love. Shanynthia and Daryl often spent time together. In 2008, Daryl was accused of assaulting a woman, albeit unintentionally, which led to charges being filed against him. Fortunately for him, the charges were eventually dropped. Shanynthia and Daryl did not get married, but they decided to live together as a couple. In 2008, they had a son named Kason. Shanynthia took on a motherly role, not only to her own son but also to Daryl's 2 children from a previous relationship. Shanynthia was a devoted mother and caring partner, which made her special to those around her. Although Shaninthia's relationship with Daryl did not last long, to Daryl, Shanynthia remained a loving wife and mother. Her life took a new turn when Shanynthia married Martin Gardner, the man who brought her joy and gave her a stable life. Shanynthia won Martin over with her kindness, love for children, and gentle nature. Their relationship developed quickly, and in September 2013, they decided to start a life together, moving into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. Their wedding marked the beginning. Shanynthia and her husband Martin started their family with the arrival of their first child, baby Talon Gardner. Their family grew as little Saya Gardner was born in 2014, followed by 2 more girls, Savi and Yahtzee. Martin and Shanynthia had 4 children together, in addition to a child from her previous relationship, creating a busy and happy home. Shanynthia prioritizes her family's health and also enjoys her part-time job at the Children's Hospital. Additionally, she supports a charity center that focuses on raising funds to support children. Her compassionate nature fuels her passion to dedicate her life to helping others. On July 1, 2016, Martin had a phone conversation with Shanynthia around noon, as she was getting ready to watch a movie with their children. The couple were chatting quietly. Shanynthia suddenly lost control and grabbed a kitchen knife. She walked into the living room, where she brutally attacked her 6-month-old daughter, Yahtzee, without any apparent reason or provocation. The innocent child, unable to defend herself, was tragically killed at the hands of her mother. The eldest child, a 7-year-old boy named Kason, witnessed the horrific scene. Too young to understand the situation, the boy ran away from home. Shanynthia, still armed with the knife, pursued her son out of the house, intent on continuing her violent rampage. The boy's terrified screams caught the attention of nearby neighbors. Realizing that the neighbor had seen Kason, Shanynthia immediately stopped. She returned to the house where Savi and Talon were lying. Upon entering the house, Shanynthia rushed to the bedroom where her young children were lying and rushed to kill them. Neighbors who witnessed the horrific scene quickly contacted the police for assistance, pleading for help in rescuing Kason and his siblings. The police arrived at Shaninthia's home. They found Shanynthia, covered in blood, along with her 4 dead children. The scene shocked everyone. Shanynthia, still holding her cell phone in her hand, calmly called her husband Martin and confessed to killing the children. By the time the police arrived, the incident was over, and an eerie silence had fallen over the once happy home of the Shanynthia family. The house was now a scene of horror, with blood stains in every corner. A bloody knife, recovered by the police. When clergy and police arrived to assist, they were confronted with a horrifying reality. The police began gathering information and conducting an investigation. Shanynthia was held without bail and her trial is scheduled for July 5th. Michelle Jaiman, Shaninthia's co-worker, defended Shanynthia on social media. Michelle highlighted the possibility of Shanynthia suffering from postpartum depression. Cases like Shaninthia's have sparked discussions about mental illness and such tragic events. Dr. Joel Rissman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that mothers killing their children is extremely rare and is usually related to underlying mental health issues. Dr. Diane Barnes, an expert in psychology and postpartum health, made a crucial distinction between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. According to her, these are two distinct conditions with unique symptoms. Dr. Diane cast doubt on the idea that Shanynthia Gardner was suffering from postpartum depression at the time of her actions. Craig Morton was appointed as Shaninthia's defense attorney. During the July 5, 2016 court hearing, Shanynthia participated via video link, but remained completely silent, not answering any questions from Judge L. Lambert. After the trial, Shanynthia was admitted to a mental health institute. Meanwhile, Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols were preparing to file a warrant for evidence gathered in the case. In January 2017, Shanynthia faced formal charges on 4 counts, 2 counts of child abuse, 1 count of aggravated murder, and 1 count of child neglect. Her mother, Sonia, was shocked and confused when she learned about the horrific incident and immediately rushed to the scene to find her grandson. Initially, Sonia suspected that Shanynthia and Martin were divorcing, and the prospect of raising 5 children alone may have driven Shanynthia to make the desperate decision. Shaninthia's ex-husband, Kaysen's father, said, although he was not his son's guardian after the relationship ended, he was still able to visit Kaysen whenever he wanted. However, the last time he saw his son was in November 2014. He noticed that Shaninthia's behavior was becoming more and more extreme. Every time he tried to contact Kaysen, he was unsuccessful. Those close to Shanynthia observed a change in her. She began to feel irritable, which gradually turned into anxiety, paranoia, and panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, leading many to suspect that she might be suffering from postpartum depression. This change shocked those around her, as Shanynthia had previously been a kind person, and the sudden change in her behavior left many wondering what had led to this tragic situation. The first signs of unusual behavior began in March 2015. Shanynthia Gardner left work and picked up her 5 children. She then drove away from her Memphis home, down an unfamiliar road. Her husband, Martin Gardner, initially thought she had gone for a walk in a nearby park to clear her head. However, as hours passed and Shanynthia did not return home, Martin became concerned and decided to report her missing to the police. He put out an alert for her car, which contained her and their 5 children. Unknown to Martin, Shanynthia had driven more than 74 miles east to Corinth, a place where she had no relatives. She was eventually found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, although the circumstances surrounding her arrival remain unclear. Upon examination, medical staff discovered shallow cuts to Shaninthia's neck and one wrist. It appeared she had attempted to harm herself, leaving many questions unanswered for her young children, who were too young to fully understand the situation. Following her return home, Shaninthia's behavior became increasingly strange. She claimed that someone was threatening her and her family, but she provided no details about the identity of the person or their motives. Martin was shocked, as there had been no previous threats or incidents. Additionally, Shanynthia began expressing dissatisfaction with her job and workload when around family and friends, stating that she felt terrible about it. She eventually started claiming that some of her co-workers were out to harm her. Despite these erratic claims, Shanynthia did not display any signs of violent or abusive behavior towards her children or others. Shanynthia Gardner's trial begins in 2021. Her defense team is focusing on her mental illness. The judge, James of the Shelby County Criminal Court, rejected the defense's argument, and in December 2021, Shanynthia Gardner was found guilty of all charges. Shanynthia Gardner, then 34, was sentenced in February 2022. She received a life sentence for each murder charge and 15 years for each count of child abuse and neglect. Due to Tennessee's laws, Shanynthia Gardner will be eligible for parole after serving a total of 51 years in prison. After the sentencing, the prosecutor expressed his agreement with the decision, stating that it aligned with his goal of achieving justice for Martin and his children. Martin felt a sense of relief knowing that Shanynthia would no longer be able to harm any children. A vigil was held at the apartment complex where the family lived, attended by neighbors, family members, law enforcement officers, and others. Sonia, the grandmother of one of the victims, was among those in attendance. The group lit red and white candles and prayed for the victims. Following the loss, Martin's colleagues set up a social media account to help him prepare for the funeral of his 4 children. During the service, Martin gave an emotional final speech, recalling his home as a place filled with happiness when his children and Shanynthia were present, and expressing his intention to keep that memory alive. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Emmett Corrigan. Ashley Harmon was a vibrant and intelligent individual. However, her parents' divorce when she was 9 years old marked the beginning of a challenging period in her life. During this time, Ashley took on a maternal role, caring for and protecting her 5 siblings. Faith is the foundation of her life. As a devoted member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Ashley found strength and comfort in her relationship with God. Whenever she faced adversity, her faith provided her with the resilience to persevere. Ashley's unwavering commitment to her faith gave her the courage to overcome obstacles and difficult situations head-on. In 2003, while studying human development at Utah State, Ashley met Emmett Corrigan, a philosophy student. Emmett, like Ashley, had experienced the pain of parental separation, having gone through a similar experience at the age of 10. He, too, found solace in the Mormon faith. Emmett was 17 years old when he was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints, surrounded by his loved ones. Around that time, Ashley caught his eye, and he was immediately drawn to her intelligence. Emmett confided in his close friends that he was certain Ashley was the one he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. As their relationship blossomed, Emmett proposed to Ashley during the 2008 Christmas season, just a few months after they met. Overjoyed, Ashley said yes, and they began making wedding plans. The couple exchanged vows in a Mormon temple, a ceremony that reflected their shared values. Their marriage brought joy and stability to their lives. In the Mormon faith, marriage is deeply revered as a sacred and eternal bond between 2 people. Mormons believe that this bond transcends mortality, continuing even after death. Divorce is discouraged but allowed in exceptional cases. In 2005, Ashley and Emmett welcomed twin daughters, marking the beginning of their parenthood journey. They were ecstatic to take on their new roles. Emmett cherished every moment spent with the girls, embracing fatherhood. Ashley was thrilled to be living her dream life. While attending Utah State University, the couple managed to balance childcare and educational responsibilities. Despite challenges, their faith and love helped them overcome obstacles. They persevered, striving for a better future. By 2009, Emmett graduated with high honors, then attended law school and passed the bar exam. He pursued a career as an attorney. Meanwhile, Ashley focused on raising their growing family, dedicating herself to household management and childcare for their 4 children. The Corrigan family appeared to have a perfect life to outsiders. They resided in a lovely home with multiple children, and Emmett had a rewarding career. However, their situation wasn't as ideal as it seemed. By August 2010, Emmett felt increasingly pressured to support his family financially, particularly with 4 young children under the age of 5. To solve this problem, he decided to start his own business, focusing on working as a criminal defense lawyer. A friend introduced Emmett to Candy Hall, a well-regarded paralegal with experience working for a criminal attorney. After a successful lunch meeting, Emmett hired Candy to work at his firm. At the time, Candy was married to Robert Hall, who was widely regarded as a devoted father and diligent worker. When Candy started working for Emmett Corrigan, she was initially excited, and her family was happy for her. However, as time passed, Emmett's wife, Ashley, began to notice that their marriage was changing. Emmett was under a lot of stress. To cope with the stress, Emmett started spending more time at the gym, which became an addiction for him. He went to the gym regularly, leaving Ashley alone to take care of the children. Despite the growing distance between them, Ashley and Emmett welcomed their 5th child, a son, on January 15, 2011. However, Emmett's behavior changed even more after the birth of their son. He began spending more time away from home, sometimes staying out overnight. Ashley became concerned about Emmett's activities and confided in her sister that she feared he might be cheating on her. Meanwhile, Candy, Emmett's assistant, was also experiencing problems in her marriage. Her husband, Robert, was jealous of her working for a young and charismatic man like Emmett, which led to constant fighting and took a toll on their marriage. On March 6, 2011, Ashley and Emmett's 7th wedding anniversary had arrived, but Emmett was absent, claiming he had to attend a bodybuilding convention. Ashley was left alone with the children, feeling anxious about their marriage. She wondered if she was to blame for Emmett's unhappiness. Determined to improve things, she pushed on, as divorce wasn't an option. Ashley chose to address the issue directly. A few days later, on March 11th, she spent the entire day planning the perfect evening to reconnect with Emmett. She prepared his favorite meal, cleaned the house, and made sure the children behaved. At 6 p.m., Ashley had the table set, ready to greet him warmly. However, Emmett didn't arrive until 2 hours later. When Ashley approached him with a kiss, he turned away, further straining their relationship. Despite Emmett's cold demeanor and the growing distance between them, Ashley remained determined to rekindle their love. She believed their relationship was worth fighting for and was willing to do whatever it took to repair it. The family gathered around the table to eat. However, Emmett claimed he wasn't hungry, which was disappointing and hurtful to Ashley. As the rest of the family enjoyed their dinner, Emmett got up, saying he needed to go to Walgreens, but Ashley sensed something was wrong and asked him to stay. Emmett responded harshly and left, leaving Ashley feeling confused and hurt. Meanwhile, Emmett's assistant, Candy, was dealing with her own marital problems. Her husband, Robert, had decided to leave their home after their marriage reached a breaking point. Despite their love for each other, Robert believed it was best to start fresh and move on. That evening, Robert phoned his daughter to check if she was using Candy's car. She told him she isn't. A few minutes later, while driving past Walgreens, she spotted her mother's car in the parking lot. She didn't think much of it and immediately called her father to let him know. Robert responded casually with, "Oh, okay." Unbeknownst to them, this ordinary-sounding conversation would have a profound impact on 2 families' lives forever. Ashley lay in bed, overcome with worry about her marriage. Despite her frantic texts and calls, Emmett remained unreachable. A nagging feeling in her gut left her uneasy. Around 1 p.m., a 911 call reported gunshots and a screaming woman in a Walgreens parking lot, prompting a swift police response. Upon arrival, the first officer was met with a disturbing scene: a lifeless man on the ground and a wounded person clutching their head in pain. Police sought to speak with Candy Hall, who was present at the scene. She identified the wounded person as her husband, Robert, and the deceased as her boss, Emmett. Emmett had suffered fatal gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Shortly after his body was discovered, Ashley was awakened by a knock on the door from the police. Ashley was stunned and inconsolable, unable to comprehend the events that led to this tragedy. After the police informed Ashley of her husband's death, a detective inquired if she was familiar with Robert and Candy Hall. Ashley stated that she knew Candy as Emmett's assistant but suspected an affair between Candy and Emmett. The police took Candy Hall from the Walgreens parking lot for questioning to piece together the events leading to Emmett's death and Robert's head injury. During the interrogation, detectives asked Candy if she had a romantic relationship with her boss, Emmett. She denied it, also refuting any intimate encounters between them. Candy claimed she went to Walgreens that night to collect a prescription and coincidentally met Emmett. After that, she and Emmett decided to take a drive. While driving to a gas station, Candy received a call from her estranged husband, Robert. She told him she was with Emmett, which led to Robert expressing jealousy and making a threat against Emmett. Candy and Emmett arrived at Walgreens after what felt like an eternity. As they stepped out of the car, Candy saw Robert standing at the entrance. He looked visibly angry. An intense argument broke out between Robert and Emmett, leading to a physical fight. Then, 3 shots were fired, and both men fell to the ground. Candy saw the gun, picked it up, and threw it aside. When questioned by detectives, Candy claimed she didn't know who fired first. After Robert received treatment for his superficial gunshot wound, detectives interviewed him. They told Robert they found a gun at the scene and asked him who it belonged to. Robert admitted the gun was his and explained that it fell from his pocket during the fight with Emmett in the parking lot. Robert alleged that Emmett dove for the gun, triggering a struggle, and Emmett shot him in the head. However, Robert couldn't recall who shot Emmett during the struggle. Given Robert's head wound, detectives weren't surprised by his hazy memory. Nevertheless, they wondered if Emmett was indeed the one who fired first, considering he was the one who ended up dead. To investigate the shooting in the Walgreens parking lot, detectives reviewed the security footage. At 9:55 p.m., Robert Hall arrived in the parking lot. A minute later, he entered the Walgreens store and quickly moved through each aisle, appearing to look for someone. He left the store at 10:06 p.m. and parked his car next to Candy's, waiting there for a few minutes. About 10 minutes later, Emmett's truck entered the parking lot. However, the actual shooting was not captured on camera. Candy, Emmett's assistant, initially denied being in a romantic relationship with Emmett. However, their co-workers suspected otherwise. Co-workers reported seeing Candy and Emmett spending a lot of time together in Emmett's office with the door closed. 3 weeks after Candy was hired, on the day Emmett was shot, detectives discovered that Emmett had accompanied Candy to the public defender's office to discuss her divorce from Robert. During the investigation into Emmett's murder, crime scene investigators searched Emmett's vehicle and found steroids in the glove compartment. This discovery didn't surprise Emmett's loved ones. When Candy gave her statement, she described a shot cadence that led detectives to believe Robert shot Emmett twice before shooting himself in the head. Based on this evidence, detectives obtained an arrest warrant for Robert Hall, charging him with first-degree murder. Robert Hall was arrested and charged with Emmett's murder. The consequences of Robert Hall's actions were severe, with a possible conviction of first-degree murder carrying a sentence of either life in prison without parole or the death penalty. Prosecutors argued that Robert Hall was driven by anger towards Emmett, who had been having an affair with Robert's wife, Candy. They alleged that this anger led Robert to shoot Emmett and then attempt to take his own life. In contrast, Robert's defense team presented a different scenario. They claimed that Emmett, who had a history of steroid abuse, was the aggressor on the night of his death. According to the defense, Emmett managed to get hold of Robert's gun during the altercation and shot Robert first. Robert then regained control of the gun and killed Emmett in self-defense. Candy Hall, Robert's wife, was a key witness in the trial. Her testimony differed slightly from her initial statement to the police. On the witness stand, Candy described hearing a single pop, followed by 2 rapid pops, rather than the initial 2 shots and then a third. This revised testimony supported the defense's argument that Emmett had shot Robert first, and that Robert had then shot Emmett twice, resulting in his death. To prove that Robert was the shooter in the Walgreens parking lot, prosecutors presented forensic evidence about the type of weapon used. This evidence showed that the weapon accumulates a large amount of gunshot residue, GSR, after being fired. After the shooting, investigators tested Robert and Emmett for gunshot residue. The test found 32 gunshot residue particles on Robert's left palm and 23 on his right. In contrast, Emmett had only 1 particle on his left hand and none on his right. These results strongly suggested that Robert fired the gun, not Emmett. After a thorough review, the jury delivered a verdict of not guilty of first-degree murder for Robert Hull. However, they unanimously agreed that he was guilty of second-degree murder, indicating that the murder was not premeditated. As a result, Robert was sentenced to 30 years in prison by the presiding judge. He will be eligible for parole in 2028 at the age of 58. Despite being convicted, Robert has consistently maintained his innocence and appealed the verdict. In 2021, the Idaho Supreme Court reaffirmed his conviction, denying his request for a retrial. Ashley struggled to cope with the fact that her husband, Emmett, was murdered by the husband of his lover, Candy Hall. In a 2015 Dr. Phil interview, Ashley met Candy face-to-face for the first time. Despite the emotional pain, Ashley was determined to move forward. She closed the book on her old life and started anew by moving out of the town where she and Emmett raised their 5 children. As time passed, the children adjusted to the change and started to find happiness again. Ashley eventually remarried and had 2 more children. She currently blogs to support trauma victims. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Justine Valdez. On May 19, 2018, 24 years old Justine Valdez went about her daily routine as usual. After finishing paperwork for her residency permit, she went to the gym and worked out until around 4:20 p.m. Then, she planned to head home. Her mother, Terrace, asked her to pick up some bread on the way, so Valdez stopped at the store before catching the 185 bus to Bray, which left after 6:09 p.m. The bus dropped Justine off at a familiar stop near her rural home, from which she normally walked the final 15 minutes to her doorstep. However, when Justine failed to arrive home, her mother Terrace became worried. Terrace was used to Justine being on time and communicating regularly, but when she couldn't reach her daughter by phone or message, she started to get anxious. As the hours passed with no word from Justine, Terrace decided to go out and look for her. Terrace's daughter Justine was expected to return home by bus, but when she failed to arrive, Terrace became increasingly worried and frantic. She stopped people on the street and asked if they had seen Justine, describing her Asian features and the sporty clothes she was wearing. Despite several people claiming to have spotted Justine getting off the bus, her disappearance remained a complete mystery. Terrace's worry escalated as each passing minute brought no new information about Justine's whereabouts or safety. Terrace was overwhelmed by anxiety and eventually reported Justine missing to the police, in the hope that they could locate her. Detectives promptly started investigating Justine's vanishing and initiated a thorough search. They looked into her daily routine and questioned people who knew her to explore every possibility, including whether Justine had left of her own free will. Justine Valdez lived with her parents, Terrace and Daniel, in the quiet Irish countryside. Her parents had moved to Ireland from the Philippines in search of a better life and brought Justine to join them in 2015. Despite struggling financially, Justine's parents worked hard to support her education and well-being. Justine was a responsible and diligent student, studying accounting at university while working part-time jobs to help pay for her studies and support her family. She worked as a waitress in Bray and as a childcare provider in her neighborhood, and even lived in the servant quarters of a large estate where her parents worked as a gardener and housekeeper. Justine was known for being reliable, hardworking, and dedicated to her responsibilities. Given her close relationship with her family and her strong sense of duty, it was unthinkable that she would voluntarily leave them behind. Her limited social life and lack of typical teenage rebellion also made it seem unlikely that she would run away. Despite efforts to contact everyone who knew Justine, no one had any information about her disappearance. As a 24 years old, Justine had long since moved past her teenage years and was very close to her family, making it unlikely that she would run away. She kept her parents informed about her daily activities, and on the day she went missing, she and her mother exchanged 63 messages. The last message was at 6:24 p.m. when Justine got off the bus. During the investigation, a crucial tip came from Justine's coworkers. A woman who was driving by with her 12-year-old son reported a disturbing incident to the police. She claimed to have seen a man pushing a woman who looked like Justine into the trunk of a black Nissan Qashqai. This incident happened just minutes after Justine got off the bus, and the police were quickly alerted to the situation. A second motorist soon came across a disturbing scene. An Asian girl was sitting in the back of a vehicle, tapping on the window and clearly frightened. The driver was initially unsure of what to make of the situation, but after discussing it with his wife when he got home, he realized the seriousness of what he had seen. He immediately called the authorities at 7:20 p.m. to report a possible kidnapping. Around the same time, another driver contacted the police to report a suspicious Nissan vehicle driving erratically about 6 kilometers from NS car. Patrol officers quickly responded to the location given by the initial female caller. When they arrived, they found Justine's broken cell phone and a bag of bread on the roadside, which raised serious concerns for her safety. Based on this evidence, investigators believed that the kidnapper had targeted Justine while she was walking home from the bus stop. The kidnapper had tried to put Justine in the trunk of the car, but she resisted. He then forced her into the back seat and drove away to an unknown location. The suspect's black Nissan was immediately put on the wanted list, and a large search effort began, involving patrol cars and helicopters. However, the search was difficult due to the darkness of the night, and no immediate leads were found. When daylight came, the search resumed, and detectives re-examined eyewitness accounts and narrowed down the list of potential suspects. Mark Hennessy, a 40-year-old man, was identified as a person of interest in the investigation because his appearance matched the description of the kidnapper. Police officers visited Mark Hennessy's home, but his wife, Nicola, had no idea where he was. She told them that he had left for a drink after work the day before and hadn't returned. This new information raised even more suspicions about Mark, leading investigators to look deeper into his past. Mark seemed like a model citizen. He was a devoted husband and father of 2 young daughters, with a stable job as an estimator on construction sites. He came from a respected family and lived in a wealthy neighborhood with other young families. He had no prior run-ins with the law and appeared to be a pillar of the community. However, the police knew that people can often hide their true nature behind a mask of respectability. Police officers visited the bar Mark had gone to the night before to ask questions and gather information. The bar staff confirmed that Mark had been there, but only stayed for a short time to have a beer and watch a soccer match around 5:40 p.m. He left the bar in a visibly agitated state and returned around midnight, staying only for 10 minutes before driving away in his car at 11 p.m. After further review, it was discovered that Mark had actually returned to the bar's entrance to chat with someone before leaving again. A review of the bar's CCTV footage confirmed the staff's accounts of Mark's brief visits. However, this still left a gap in his whereabouts between 5:40 p.m. and 11 p.m., and investigators remained unsure of what Mark had done during this time. Meanwhile, detectives also obtained CCTV footage of the bus route that Justine had taken, which led to a disturbing discovery. Mark's black Nissan was spotted following the bus just 30 minutes after he left the bar, raising suspicions about his involvement in Justine's disappearance. As the search for Mark's car and Justine continued, it became increasingly clear that the incidents were connected, and Mark emerged as the prime suspect in her abduction. Despite efforts to track his cell phone, Mark managed to stay one step ahead of the authorities. He made a single call to his wife, telling her he would be away for a while, but refused to surrender to the police even when his family begged him to do so. The investigators learned about the encounter from Mark's parents, and as a result, they strengthened their search for Mark. However, Mark remained elusive. The police turned to the public for help, issuing appeals through the media and asking anyone with information about Justine, Mark, or his car to come forward. One person responded to the appeal, spotting a Nissan that matched the description of Mark's car. She followed the vehicle to Cherrywood Park, where she observed the driver closely before notifying the authorities. When the police arrived, they found a man covered in blood sitting behind the wheel. Mark refused to leave his vehicle, even when police tried to persuade him. He threatened them with a knife, so they had to shoot him to protect themselves. The bullet hit Mark in the shoulder. When police took him out of the car, he was awake but not cooperating. They searched the vehicle, hoping to find Justine, but she was not there. Police questioned Mark repeatedly, but he wouldn't answer. Medical staff treated his injuries, and he was rushed to the hospital. Doctors fought to save Mark's life, hoping he would reveal Justine's location. Unfortunately, the bullet had bounced off and hit Mark in the head, killing him. Further investigation showed that the blood on Mark's face and body was his own, and he had several new stab wounds on his arm and neck. The police speculated that Mark, driven by a fear of being caught, had used a knife from his vehicle to prepare for a confrontation. When they finally caught him, the officers felt a sense of disappointment. They had found Mark and his vehicle, but their main goal was still unfulfilled. They had not found the missing person, Justine. At the scene, they found a note, but it was difficult to read due to the presence of blood. The officers were, however, able to decipher the words "sorry" and "Pease Castle," which provided a lead in the search for Justine. The search for Justine Valdez continued despite the dim hopes of her safe return. As her anxious parents prayed for her well-being, a thorough search was conducted in a wooded area south of Dublin, guided by a cryptic clue found near a castle. The search yielded Justine's purse, which contained her identification documents. Unfortunately, on May 21st, the search party discovered Justine's body. The autopsy revealed that Justine had been murdered on the evening of her abduction, with manual strangulation being the cause of death. Further examination showed that she had been subjected to a sexual assault, adding to the brutality of her demise. Amidst the sorrow and despair, a disturbing revelation emerged from the toxicological analysis. Justine's body contained trace amounts of prohibited substances. The presence of these substances raised many questions, with no clear explanation for their origin or purpose. Add a surprising twist to the case. Test results showed that Mark had ingested a substantial amount of these substances, making the circumstances surrounding the tragic events even more complex and difficult to understand. Mark's life had been spiraling out of control due to his struggles with alcohol and substance abuse, which likely contributed to the drugs found in Justine's system. His home life was also deteriorating, with frequent arguments with his spouse over his addiction and growing debts. Investigations revealed that Mark was actively using the dating app Tinder, where he was pursuing interactions with multiple women, including flirting with them at bars. Furthermore, his DNA was found on Justine's body, solidifying the police's suspicions of his involvement in her abduction and murder. As detectives pieced together the evidence, a disturbing narrative emerged. The murder was driven by Mark's sexual motives, and Justine became an innocent victim in his sinister quest. Mark had spotted Justine while following a bus and seized the opportunity to grab her off the street in broad daylight, despite the presence of multiple witnesses. A thorough examination of the victims' and perpetrators' phones revealed that they had no prior connection or communication. They had never met before, and there were no mutual connections between them. This grim revelation highlighted the tragic randomness of Justine's fate and the calculated brutality of Mark's actions. Upon closer examination, the detectives' initial assessment of the case changed significantly. It became clear that Mark was very familiar with the route Justine often took, suggesting that her murder was planned in advance rather than a spontaneous act. Mark had been carefully watching her movements, waiting for the right moment to strike. The day of the abduction was a deliberate break from his usual routine, as he intentionally positioned himself at the bus stop, following Justine's every move until he attacked her. The local community was deeply shaken by the tragic event, as such heinous acts were rare in their otherwise peaceful neighborhood. Many people rallied around the Justine family, offering them comfort and support during their time of immense loss. At the farewell ceremony, heartfelt tributes were paid to Justine, and white balloons were released into the sky, symbolizing hope in the midst of despair. Some attendees wore pink T-shirts with Justine's image, a touching tribute to her memory. Justine's family eventually decided to return to their native Philippines to lay her to rest, seeking comfort in familiar surroundings. However, they initially stayed abroad for a period before returning to Ireland in 2021, seeking a fresh start and new opportunities. They relocated to a different city and pursued new careers, which allowed them to heal from the painful memories that haunted them in their former home. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Scott Ponder. Scott Dean Ponder was born on February 7, 1973, to a loving family. His mother, Beverly Guy, and stepfather, Terry Guy, encouraged his passion for cars and motorcycles from a young age. They supported his development as a rider and even helped him obtain a racing license as soon as he was eligible. Scott's talent and dedication earned him recognition, including numerous admirers and local hero status in Chesney. Scott was a sociable person who enjoyed spending time with many people, and they enjoyed his company as well. In the late 1990s, Scott started repairing bikes in his grandmother's backyard, which eventually led to the establishment of Superbike Motorsports. The business expanded to a one-garage building in 2001, and Scott brought in his best friend, Brian Lucas, as a partner. They partnered to obtain a Suzuki dealership, resulting in swift expansion and achievement. Brian, who initially worked part-time when the business first started, left his job to become the store's full-time manager. Through their dedication and expertise, the duo attracted numerous customers, and the business began to flourish. Despite being salesmen, they prioritized educating their customers about bikes and racing. Scott's mother, Beverly Guy, who initially visited the store occasionally, began to visit regularly and eventually took on responsibilities such as accounting, payroll, and cash management. With the trio's combined efforts, the business thrived, selling 100,000 motorbikes every month. Scott attended an industry convention in Chicago, where he met his future wife, Melissa Brackman, a former homecoming queen from Stafford High School. They instantly connected and enjoyed each other's company, leading to frequent meetups as their relationship deepened. Eventually, they decided to get married, and their love life, both before and after the wedding, resembled a fairy tale, with their love growing stronger each day. I met Scott at a motorcycle show in Indianapolis, where he struck me as a kind and charming Southern gentleman. My feelings for him developed rapidly, and I soon realized I was in love with him. Scott and I decided to start a family, but we struggled to conceive. We sought medical help, and after months of trying, I finally became pregnant with a baby boy. In October 2003, I discovered I was pregnant while visiting my hometown. I took a pregnancy test at my brother's house without telling anyone, and I was overjoyed when the test was positive. Scott was thrilled when I shared the news with him. Around the same time, Scott's business was booming, with millions of dollars in sales in the first year. To keep up with the demand, he expanded his store and hired a new mechanic, Chris Sherbert. Chris was well known in town for his exceptional wrench skills, which caught Scott's attention. Scott, Beverly, Brian, and Chris formed a talented team that gained recognition beyond their small town of Chesney. Scott Ponder's life was going smoothly until disaster struck. November 6, 2003, was a sunny day, but the atmosphere at Superbike Motorsports was vastly different. You might remember where you were on that day. I recall it clearly. I had spoken to Scott around 2:15 p.m., and our conversation was brief and normal. He said goodbye, and that was the last time we spoke. Scott and the others began their day at the shop as usual. The store had a few customers browsing, including Kelly Sisk and his 4-year-old son. Kelly was there to purchase a go-kart for his family, and after completing the transaction, he lingered in the shop for a bit. Brian was supposed to be on holiday with his family, but Scott called him in to address a customer complaint about a neglected bike. Brian arrived at the shop and immediately started working on the bike. Meanwhile, Scott was helping another customer when his mother, Beverly, stopped by. She had just taken Scott's cancer-stricken grandmother to chemotherapy and was planning to deposit money into Scott's account at the bank later that day, around 2:30 p.m. Beverly lent a hand to Scott at the counter, assisting him with his tasks. Scott's friend Noel called the Superbike Motorsports shop, also known as the shop. Beverly answered the phone and agreed to let Noel stop by, which he said would take only 7 minutes. After hanging up, Beverly went to use the bathroom. Within those 7 minutes, a tragic event unfolded. Scott, Brian, Beverly, and Chris, the 4 people present at the shop, were brutally shot and killed. The shooting occurred at 3 p.m. inside the Superbike Motorsports premises. When Scott's friend Noel arrived, he found Scott and Brian lying motionless at the front of the shop. Initially, Noel thought they were playing a prank and even kicked them, telling them to stop joking around. However, upon seeing the pool of blood beneath their bodies, he quickly realized the gravity of the situation and called 911. Noel reported the incident to the emergency operator, stating that everyone at the shop had been shot and was lying in a pool of blood, including his mom, the mechanic, and the owner. The police and paramedics rushed to the scene, as this was the first quadruple murder in the small town of Chesney. The news spread rapidly, drawing not only the victims' families but also a crowd of onlookers to the crime scene. The police launched an immediate investigation and began collecting evidence at the crime scene. They discovered Chris's body at the back of the shop, positioned as if he had been working on a bike just before being killed. Beverly's body was found inside the shop, near the bathroom, suggesting she was ambushed as she exited. The bodies of Brian and Scott were located at the front of the store, with Brian's closer to the door and Scott's closer to a parked car. It appeared that both men had attempted to flee after hearing gunshots and encountering the shooter, but were unsuccessful. A thorough search of the crime scene by the police and forensic team yielded blood samples and other evidence. The killings were determined to be an execution-style homicide, with the shooter intentionally targeting the victims and shooting them at close range in the chest and head. Melissa, Scott's wife, received a call about the shooting and rushed to the scene. Detectives launched a thorough investigation and quickly found their first lead. Several passers-by reported seeing a couple lingering near the shop around the time of the murder. The detectives created sketches of the suspects based on the eyewitnesses' descriptions and distributed the pictures throughout South Carolina. The detectives initially suspected that the man and they was the shooter, and that he had attacked Chris and Beverly from behind while she distracted Scott and Brian at the front of the shop. However, this was only a theory, and no concrete evidence supported it. Despite months of searching, the police were unable to find any new leads. As media coverage intensified, detectives re-examined the case from a different angle, which ultimately led to a breakthrough. The detectives began to scrutinize the victims' pasts and lifestyles. While Scott, Beverly, and Brian appeared to be clean, Chris, the mechanic, had a more complex background. During the investigation, detectives discovered that Chris had previously worked for a company with ties to the drug trade. It was also revealed that Chris may have been involved in smuggling and was set to appear in court the following Monday, prior to the murders. In 2003, the police were actively working to combat a growing drug problem, particularly among young people. With Chris's connection to the drug trade now apparent, detectives and the public began to question whether the motive behind the quadruple homicide was to kill Chris specifically, with the other victims being unintentional casualties. It was also speculated that Chris's scheduled court appearance may have been a motive for his murder, as those involved in the drug business may have believed he would testify against them. Although this theory seemed plausible, particularly given that Chris was the first to be shot, there was no concrete evidence to support it. As a result, the investigation once again stalled. The case remained unsolved for an entire year, until the detectives decided to approach it from a fresh perspective. The detectives discovered that Brian, a friend and co-worker of Scott's, had been searching for a new house weeks before the murder. However, his wife Robin claimed to have had no knowledge of this decision. This revelation raised suspicions about the state of their marriage. Brian's mother, Lorraine Lucas, later revealed that their marriage was unhappy and strained, and that Brian had been planning to leave Robin to live alone. Lorraine recalled a tense encounter between Brian and Robin, during which Robin made faces behind Brian's back, leading to a confrontation when Brian asked her to treat his mother with respect. While this incident may not have seemed directly related to the shooting at first, it would later become a crucial piece of the puzzle. The quadruple murder was a catastrophic event that left the families of the 4 victims deeply traumatized and devastated. Melissa, in particular, struggled to cope with the loss of her beloved husband. Her life was once flawless, but a devastating event changed everything, leaving her to put the shattered remains back together. Despite her grief, Melissa found the strength to carry on for the sake of her newborn son, Scott Ponder Jr., who was born in June 2004. The police continued to call on Melissa for questioning, but she remained strong for her child's sake. In a surprising turn of events, the police obtained a DNA sample from Scott Ponder Jr.'s diaper, which was collected after Melissa had changed him at the station. The results of the DNA test shocked everyone, revealing that Ponder Jr.'s DNA matched Brian's, not Scott's. This discovery sparked tension between Melissa and her father-in-law, William Ponder, who repeatedly questioned her about the truth. Melissa was told that the detectives believed they had evidence linking her to the crime, and she was given a clear warning: if the proof implicated her, they would come for her wherever she was. As the investigation continued, the detectives began to focus on a possible love triangle between Scott, Melissa, and Brian. Rumors about Melissa's infidelity soon spread throughout the neighborhood, further complicating the case. Brian's mother considered the possibility of him having an affair due to his unhappiness in marriage and the thought of divorce. However, Melissa consistently denied any involvement with Brian and affirmed Scott Ponder child's paternity, stating that she and Scott Ponder had struggled to conceive. Melissa was certain that the child belonged to her and Scott, and she remained convinced even after being questioned multiple times. For a year and a half, detectives monitored Melissa's every move, searching for a lead. Then, after 18 months, they revealed a startling discovery: the blood sample collected from the crime scene contained an error. A DNA test showed a match between Brian and Beverly's DNA, which should not be the case since Scott was Beverly's son, not Brian. Realizing their mistake, detectives understood that the blood samples from Scott and Brian had been mislabeled due to their close proximity at the crime scene. The discovery cleared Melissa's name regarding the love triangle theory, and detectives began to investigate a connection between the Superbike Motorsports homicide and another murder that occurred just 30 meters away, 5 months earlier. On May 16, 2003, a triple homicide shook the town of Greer, South Carolina. The incident took place at the Blue Ridge Savings Bank, where Sylvia Holtzclaw was due to start her shift. However, a local couple, Dee and Maggie Barnes, visited the bank at around 1:30 p.m. A 911 call was made to the Greer Police Department, reporting a shooting at the bank. Unfortunately, Sylvia, Dee, and Maggie were found shot to death. The Greer Police Department received a distress call from the Blue Ridge Savings Bank. One of the responding officers described the scene, noting that they were among the first to arrive. Like the Superbike Motorsports incident, the shooting occurred in broad daylight with no witnesses present. After reviewing the CCTV footage, police observed a red car driving towards the bank at 1:24 p.m. and leaving 3 minutes after the incident. A red car was spotted driving to a bank on Frontage Road at 1:24 p.m. 3 minutes later, the Barnes family was seen driving in the same area. Coincidentally, a similar red car was seen at the scene of a quadruple homicide at Superbike Motorsports. Detectives began searching for the red car and discovered it had been stolen from a rental lot by 39-year-old Emerson Wright days before the homicide. Police believed Emerson had entered the bank to rob it, but panicked and shot a couple who tried to intervene. However, detectives were unable to question Emerson about the bank and Superbike Motorsports murders due to a series of events that unfolded 2 years later. Emerson was wanted for a string of burglaries in the Atlanta area when he was chased by a state trooper. He crashed his car, got out, and shot himself in the head with a single gunshot wound. Although detectives noted similarities between their cases, they did not believe they were connected. The quadruple homicide at Superbike Motorsports in 2003 went cold just months later, leaving the victims' families, including Melissa, without any answers for 13 long years. Despite the lack of progress, Melissa and the other families of the victims refused to give up, tirelessly searching for any lead that might uncover the truth behind the gruesome crime. Unfortunately, their efforts yielded nothing. However, in 2016, the case was reopened after detectives made a breakthrough. This development brought new hope to the families, 13 years after the crime had taken place. The man behind the quadruple murder finally emerged when he was arrested for an unrelated crime. During his interrogation, he confessed to the Superbike Motorsports murders. The killer was 45 years old Todd Kohlhepp, born on March 7, 1971, to parents Reggie and William. After his parents' divorce when he was just 2 years old, Todd began living with his mother and her new partner, but he often sought to spend more time with his biological father. Todd's behavior was extremely aggressive and volatile, particularly when he was young. He struggled with controlling his anger, which often led to violent outbursts. During his time in nursery school, he killed a goldfish with bleach and shot a dog with a BB gun. Despite spending 3.5 months in a psychiatric hospital in Georgia, his behavior showed no signs of improvement. As a last resort, his mother, Ray G., sent him to live with his father, William, in the hopes that a change of environment would help him manage his behavior. However, this change had little effect. At the age of 15, Todd planned and executed the kidnapping of 14-year-old Christy Granado in Tempe, Arizona, on November 25, 1986. Todd knocked on Christie's door, threatened her with a .22 caliber revolver, and forced her to follow him to his home. Once there, he tied her up, taped her mouth shut, and assaulted her. After the assault, he walked her home and threatened to kill her entire family if she told anyone about the incident. However, Christie confided in her parents, who immediately called 911. As a result, Todd was charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and committing a dangerous crime against children. In 1987, he pleaded guilty to the kidnapping charge, and the other charges were dropped. Todd was sentenced to 15 years in prison and was required to register as a sex offender. When Todd was released, he was a reformed person and he turned over a new leaf, started his own business, and even got a job. For a long time, there were no more complaints filed against him. However, in 2016, a disturbing incident occurred. On August 31, 2016, 30-year-old Carla Brown and her 32-year-old boyfriend, Charlie David Carver, went missing after they were last seen visiting Todd's house to remove brush from one of his properties. Investigations led to a horrific discovery on November 3, 2016, when Carla was found chained to a wall inside a metal storage container on Todd's property. Further investigations uncovered the body of Charlie, which had multiple gunshot wounds. Carla reported to detectives that Todd had shot Charlie and kept her captive, regularly assaulting her brutally and threatening her not to try to escape. Todd was arrested and taken in for questioning. During the interrogation, he confessed to being the one responsible for a shooting that occurred at Superbike Motorsports 13 years earlier. On November 5, 2016, Todd was brought in for questioning and recounted the events of November 6, 2003, in a matter-of-fact way, without showing any signs of fear or guilt. According to Todd, on November 6, 2003, he bought a Suzuki GSX-R 750 from Superbike Motorsports, but soon realized he couldn't ride it due to his lack of experience. He decided to exchange the bike for a more beginner-friendly model. However, this exchange didn't happen on the same day. Todd told the detectives that his friends Scott and Brian teased him about his inability to ride the bike. After the bike theft, which occurred 14 days after the purchase, Todd filed a police report, but the bike was never recovered. Adding to his frustration, the police officer handling the case made fun of him, and neither the police nor the shop contacted him about the stolen bike or the $1,000 insurance deposit he had lost. Todd began attending college at Greenville Tech, but his interest in bikes never waned. He found himself returning to Superbike Motorsports, where he had previously shopped. However, his interactions with two employees, Scott and Chris, turned negative. According to Todd, they would mock and laugh at him whenever he visited the shop. One day, Todd decided to take revenge on the men. He waited until the shop was empty, except for Scott, Chris, Beverly, and himself. Then, he shot and killed the 4 people he had encountered. Todd later claimed that Beverly was not his intended target, but rather an innocent bystander who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The victims' families finally found some closure and justice after 13 years, thanks to Todd's confession. In addition to the killings at Superbike Motorsports, Todd confessed to murdering Johnny, Joe, and Megan Lee Coxey, and Charlie David Carver, all of whom died from gunshot wounds. Despite being a serial killer, Todd did not face a trial. Instead, prosecutors negotiated a plea deal with him after consulting with the victims' families and a survivor. As part of the deal, the state offered Todd a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, which he accepted just 7 months after his arrest. Todd was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences on May 23, 2017. In addition to these life sentences, he received 30 years for assault and 30 years for kidnapping. However, the fact that Todd pleaded guilty without a trial left many, including the victims' families, feeling that justice had not been fully served. The case also outraged the general public, who felt that the long wait for justice was unfair. Seventh Circuit Solicitor Barry Barnett expressed the frustration felt by many, stating that families should not have to wait years for justice. However, for Melissa, the wife of victim Scott Ponder, the sentencing brought a sense of relief and closure. She and other family members of the victims came together to hold a vigil in memory of their loved ones. After 13 years of pain and suffering, the victims' families finally had the answers they had been seeking about what had happened to their loved ones. In an interview, Melissa expressed her skepticism about Todd's motive for the murders, stating that she did not believe that her husband would have behaved in a way that would have provoked Todd. She recalled the kindness and good humor of Scott and another victim, Brian, and found it hard to believe that Todd's claims about their behavior were true. While Melissa was grateful that justice had been served, she felt that Todd's lack of remorse and casual demeanor during the investigation and court proceedings were disturbing. Many members of the public felt that Todd's crimes were so heinous that he deserved the death penalty. Todd's actions were heinous, and his lack of remorse is shocking. During the interrogation, he spoke about the murders in a casual, matter-of-fact way, as if recalling a past memory. This was truly despicable. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Julie Minogue. Julie Minogue was born on July 19, 1982, in Goshen, New York, a charming town where she was raised by her loving parents, Gerald Minogue and Sandra Barish Doper. She grew up with a sister, Allison Barati Corcoran, and a brother, Peter Gerald Minogue. Throughout her school years, Julie excelled academically at Monroe Woodbury schools, ultimately graduating from Monroe Woodbury High School. She continued her education at Orange County Community College, expanding her knowledge and embracing new experiences. After completing her education, Julie Minogue became a dedicated medical assistant at Coastal Obstetrics and Gynecology in Connecticut. Julie prioritized an active lifestyle, enjoying running and walking to stay energized. She had two sons, Nicholas Keith Turner and Sean Michael Turner. Although the details about her marriage and husband are unknown, she has a strong bond between her and her sons. Julie Minogue found love again in 2017 with Ewan Anthony DeWitt from Roxbury. Together, they welcomed a son, Luke Anthony Minogue, in 2019. However, their relationship eventually fell apart, causing them to divorce. In 2021, she moved into an apartment on Salem Walk in Milford with her sons, putting their happiness first. By 2022, Julie's eldest son, Nicholas, was 21 and had bravely served in the Coast Guard. Her middle son, Sean, was a 17-year-old high school senior. Luke, her youngest son with Ewan, was 3 years old and brought joy to their household. Julie was 40, and life seemed to be going well for her and her 3 boys. However, tragedy struck her family. On the night of December 6, 2022, 17-year-old Sean Minogue was awoken by terrifying screams. At first, he thought the noise was an echo from the neighbor's house, but the crying became louder. Realizing something was terribly wrong, Sean rushed downstairs, concerned for his mother's safety. As he descended into the darkness, he caught a man wielding an axe. And his mother lying on the floor, covered in blood. Amidst the chaos, Sean heard the haunting words, "You didn't believe me," echoing in his mind. Sean quickly ran upstairs, locked his door, and called 911 to report the incident. He placed a chair behind the locked door and opened his window to seek help. Shortly after, he could hear the sound of sirens and people approaching. When he heard the police voice, he mistakenly thought there was an intruder, so he jumped out the window. The officers found the frightened teenager and ensured his safety. Meanwhile, police officers entered the kitchen and discovered Julie Minogue lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Her face and skull had severe cuts. A large axe was found on the stove, indicating the severity of the crime. In the living room, Julie's 3-year-old son Luke was found sitting on the couch, seemingly in shock. He was unresponsive, neither crying nor speaking. An officer stayed with Luke and provided comfort until more police officers arrived at the scene. Following Julie's tragic death, her body was taken to the medical examiner's office for a thorough examination. After a meticulous autopsy, the medical examiner determined that the cause of her death was the severe chopped wounds and impact injuries to her head, torso, and extremities. The detailed findings have provided vital evidence about the attack and the cause of her death. As the police took custody of the evidence they found on the gas stove, they conducted a thorough search of the area to look for any potential evidence that could lead them to the perpetrator. They searched every inch of the house, examining each room for any clues that could shed light on the crime. The investigation attracted the attention of concerned neighbors, who gathered nearby. They was eager to support the investigation in any way they could. A neighbor gave evidence with camera footage from outside his home at the Longmeadow complex. Police have investigated the footage, hoping it will provide vital clues. As they watched, they witnessed a person walking with an axe, closely matching the description Sean had provided. The police then began searching for the identity of the man with the axe. On December 6, 2022, a major breakthrough occurred when a woman called the police to report a phone call she received from her son. With a shaky voice, she shared the shocking revelation that her son had just told her that he had killed his girlfriend. The seriousness of her words prompted an immediate response from law enforcement. They quickly located the woman and engaged her in conversation. During the conversation, police discovered that the man responsible for the disturbing confession was Ewan, a 42-year-old man who had previously been in a relationship with Julie. With this important information, the police made efforts to contact Ewan. However, Ewan abruptly hung up the call. To better understand Ewan's background, the police investigated his history. Ewan was born in 1979 in Roxbury. He had a wide range of interests and pursuits. A skilled athlete, he was passionate about ice hockey and even played in semi-professional leagues. Ewan also holds a bachelor's degree in history from Siena College. Not satisfied with just one career, he also pursued a career as a firefighter, showing his ambition. In 2006, Ewan DeWitt's life took a tumultuous turn when he was arrested in Connecticut for driving under the influence and traffic offenses. After pleading guilty, he was given a suspended prison sentence and placed on probation. However, Ewan turned his life around in 2009 when he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. Over the course of 5 years, he distinguished himself as a skilled weapons specialist and non-commissioned officer, ultimately earning the rank of Lance Corporal. During his time in the Marines, Ewan served as a machine gunner and was part of the elite 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. A notable photo from his time in service shows him bravely operating a .50 caliber machine gun on a vehicle during a defense exercise. Ewan's leadership skills and expertise helped him become captain of the machine gun section. Ewan served multiple tours in combat zones, including Afghanistan and the Middle East, alongside his fellow Marines. His selfless dedication was highlighted in a 2015 article in the Registered Citizen. One notable incident occurred shortly after the birth of his son, when he was arrested for attacking Julie Minogue. According to reports, he threw a large object at her, destroying her phone and preventing her from calling for help. Fearing for her safety, Julie sought refuge at a neighbor's house and contacted the police. In addition, Ewan, while intoxicated, getting into a heated argument with Julie and throwing a playpen at her head, causing a serious injury. Their son witnessed this incident and provided a statement. After Ewan went to rehabilitation, Julie sought a restraining order to protect herself from his abusive behavior. The court granted her a protective order that allowed for limited contact. However, Ewan was still granted visitation rights, which created ongoing concerns for Julie and her family's safety. In addition to their personal struggles, Julie and Ewan became embroiled in a series of family court cases starting in 2021. Julie initiated proceedings by seeking child support for their son Luke. The court ruled in her favor in October 2021, ordering Ewan to provide financial support. Ewan retaliated by taking Julie to court seeking resolution on visitation rights. In an effort to mediate the situation, the court granted supervised visitation, with a further hearing scheduled for April 2023 to revisit the matter. Julie and Ewan's divorce leads to many problems. Just 3 weeks before her death, Julie took action by going to Milford Police Station on November 14, 2022. She filed a complaint against Ewan for allegedly sending her more than 200 text messages in just 2 days, violating a protective order prohibiting him from making contact. Officer Scott Nablin carefully collected evidence of the text messages from Julie Minogue's phone, which further strengthened the case against Ewan. In a statement, Julie expressed deep concern for her safety and the well-being of her children. She stated that she could no longer tolerate the abuse and was seeking protection. Julie detailed the ongoing harassment she had endured and her fear of Ewan's behavior. She mentioned that he had a history of trouble with drugs and alcohol and was worried that he might harm her. In the meantime, Julie Minogue sought a civil restraining order against Ewan. On December 1, 2022, she presented evidence to a judge, including text messages, Ewan's history of substance abuse and mental health issues, and his violent past. Julie expressed concern for Ewan's well-being and emphasized the need for him to receive therapy. She believed Ewan posed a threat to others and should not be allowed to interact with anyone until he received proper treatment. The judge granted Julie a no-contact restraining order on December 1, 2022, to protect her from Ewan. The police investigation focused on Ewan, and they thoroughly searched the area around the Salem Walk condominium. They also visited a dive bar on Ocean Avenue in West Haven, asking patrons for help and providing information about the ongoing investigation. They asked anyone who saw Ewan to contact the authorities. Soon after, witnesses discovered someone resembling Ewan. They immediately alerted the police, who then observed the suspect entering a food truck in a nearby parking lot. Police quickly surrounded the truck and apprehended Ewan without any resistance. During the interrogation, Ewan initially remained silent, but after hours of intense interrogation, he finally confessed to killing Julie with an axe. He admitted to entering her house through the kitchen window, hiding and waiting for her to arrive. When Julie entered the kitchen, Ewan attacked her with an axe. Julie's son, Nicholas, witnessed the terrifying scene as he came downstairs. Frightened, Ewan dropped the axe on the gas stove and fled. The details of the incident, as revealed by Ewan, sent shockwaves through the investigation and provided a disturbing account of the events that occurred that night. During Ewan's first court appearance on December 7, 2022, Assistant State's Attorney Alana Paul updated the judge on the case. She said that Ewan confessed to the crime, but even if he did not, the evidence against him was compelling. Given the severity of the case, Paul argued that a significant sentence was necessary. Judge Odin Grogan set Ewan DeWitt's bond at $5 million due to concerns about his history of ignoring court orders and the need to prioritize public safety. As a result, Ewan was placed under surveillance. A hearing was scheduled for December 14, 2022, to further address the case. On December 14, 2022, Ewan faced multiple charges, including murder, violating a protective order, violating a restraining order, risking injury to a minor, and reckless endangerment. These charges aim to hold Ewan accountable for the full scope of his actions. A hearing for his pending cases was set for April 6, 2023. The family of the victim has released a statement, vowing to take action and hold accountable those who failed to protect their loved one. They hope that this case will lead to improved safeguards for individuals experiencing domestic violence and abuse. The family is committed to creating positive change and preventing similar tragedies from happening in the future.